The morning air bit at Alicia Park's cheeks as she zipped her jacket higher, covering the bottom half of her face. At 29, she had hiked hundreds of trails across the United States, but the rugged wilderness surrounding Denali National Park held a special allure. The September chill brought with it the smell of spruce and wet earth, a scent that had drawn her to Alaska for this solo adventure before winter claimed the landscape. Alicia adjusted her backpack, feeling the reassuring weight of her survival gear. First aid kit, extra layers, emergency blanket, bear spray, and enough food and water for a day hike that shouldn't last more than 6 hours. Perfect day for Savage Alpine, she muttered to herself, checking her watch. 6:30 a.m., early enough to avoid the sparse crowds that might venture out on a Tuesday in shoulder season. Alicia had deliberately chosen weekday hiking to minimize encounters with other travelers. Not that she disliked people. Her job as an environmental science teacher in Portland, Oregon, involved constant interaction with students, but nature spoke clearest in solitude. She had arrived in Alaska 3 days ago, staying at a small bed and breakfast in Healy, about 12 miles north of the park entrance. The elderly couple who ran the place, Frank and Dorothy Miller, had greeted her with hot chocolate and warnings about recent bear activity. Been more grizzly sightings than usual this fall, Frank had said, his weathered face creasing with concern. Rangers think it's the drought. Bears are having trouble finding enough food before hibernation. Alicia had nodded, accepting both the steaming mug and the advice with appropriate gravity. I've hiked in bear country before. I'll be careful. She carried bear spray and knew the protocols. Make noise on the trail. Avoid hiking at dawn, or dusk when bears are most active, and never ever approach a bear. Still, she couldn't deny the small flutter of anxiety mixed with excitement at the prospect of possibly spotting one of these magnificent predators, from a safe distance, of course. Now, as she locked her rented Subaru in the nearly empty parking lot, Alicia performed her pre-hike ritual. She stretched her legs, rolled her shoulders, and mentally reviewed her route. The Savage Alpine Trail was a challenging 4-mile path that climbed from the Savage River to a ridge with spectacular views of the Alaska Range. Though considered moderate to difficult, it was well within her capabilities. Hey there, heading out solo? A park ranger approached, clipboard in hand. His name tag read Mitchell. Tall with a trimmed beard speckled with gray, he had the easy confidence of someone who knew this wilderness intimately. Good morning, Alicia replied, adjusting her trekking poles. Yes, just me today. Savage Alpine. Ranger Mitchell nodded, making a note on his clipboard. Smart to get an early start. We've had increased bear activity lately, especially grizzlies. They're fattening up for winter. He glanced at her waist. Good, you've got spray? Know how to use it? Alicia patted the canister holstered at her hip. Remove the safety tab. Aim slightly down and spray in short bursts when the bear is within 30 feet, she recited. Perfect, Mitchell smiled. Make sure to make noise on the trail, especially around blind corners. Most bears will avoid you if they hear you coming. He handed her a small card with emergency numbers. Cell service is spotty at best, but if you get into trouble and can get a signal, these will connect you directly to park dispatch. Thanks. Alicia tucked the card into her pocket. Planning to be back by early afternoon. Check in at the visitor center when you return, would you? Just so we know you made it back safely. Alicia agreed, feeling a mixture of appreciation for the ranger's concern and amusement at being treated like a novice. Still, she knew better than to dismiss safety protocols. Alaska's wilderness didn't care about human experience or confidence. The first mile of trail followed the Savage River, the water rushing with late summer melt and recent rainfall. Alicia kept a steady pace, occasionally calling out, "Hey, bear!" at blind corners, feeling slightly self-conscious even with no one around to hear. The sun had crested the eastern mountains, painting the landscape in gold and long shadows. After 30 minutes, the trail began its ascent, switching back through spruce forest before emerging onto alpine tundra. The transition always thrilled Alicia, the moment when trees gave way to open space, when the world expanded around her. Her breathing deepened with exertion as the trail steepened, but she welcomed the burn in her thighs and the quickening of her heart. 2 hours into her hike, Alicia paused on a rocky outcrop to catch her breath and take a few photographs. The Valley spread below her, a mosaic of green forest and russet tundra. In the distance, clouds shrouded the peak of Denali itself. but the lower slopes of the Alaska Range stood in magnificent relief against the blue sky. She snapped several pictures with her phone before tucking it away. No Instagram post could capture the vastness, the silence broken only by wind, and the occasional call of a raven. Taking a swig from her water bottle, Alicia checked her progress on the trail map. She had completed about half the loop and would soon begin descending back toward the valley floor. Her pace had been good. Despite stopping frequently to absorb the views and take photos, she'd likely finish earlier than planned, maybe even in time for a late lunch at the park's single restaurant. The trail ahead disappeared around a rocky outcropping. Alicia adjusted her backpack and continued, calling out, "Hey, bear," as she rounded the corner. The path narrowed here, hemmed in by boulders on one side and a steep drop on the other. She moved carefully, placing her trekking poles deliberately on the uneven ground. A flash of movement caught her eye about 50 yards ahead. Alicia froze, her breath catching in her throat. A large grizzly bear stood on the trail, its massive head lowered as it pawed at something on the ground. The animal's brown fur rippled in the breeze, a lighter halo around its shoulders, giving it the grizzled appearance that had inspired the species' name. Time seemed to suspend as Alicia's mind raced through her training. Don't run. Never run. From a bear. Make yourself known but not threatening. Back away slowly if possible. Her hand instinctively moved to the bear spray at her hip, unsnapping the holster. She began to back up, her movements painfully slow and deliberate. "Hey, bear," she said, her voice steady but loud enough to carry. "Just passing through." The grizzly's head snapped up, small ears swiveling forward. It rose to its full height, at least 7 feet tall on its hind legs, and Alicia felt her heart hammering against her ribs. The bear dropped back to all fours and swung its head from side to side, scenting the air. "I'm just going to back away now," Alicia continued, her voice remarkably calm despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She took another careful step backward. Her heel caught on a loose rock. The small sound of stones skittering down the slope seemed deafening in the tense silence. The bear's reaction was immediate, a huffing grunt followed by a shambling step. Forward, Alicia froze again, the ranger's advice echoing in her mind. If a bear approaches, stand your ground. If it charges, it might be a bluff. If it makes contact... She couldn't remember what came next, her mind suddenly blank with primal fear. The grizzly took another step forward, then another. Its pace quickened. It was charging. In one fluid motion, Alicia pulled the bear spray from its holster, removed the safety clip, and pointed it toward the oncoming animal. But before she could depress the trigger, she realized her grave miscalculation. The wind, which had seemed so gentle and pleasant earlier, was blowing directly toward her. Spraying now would send the capsaicin cloud straight into her own face. She hesitated just for a second, and that second was all it took. The bear closed the distance, with shocking speed for an animal of its size. Alicia had time only to turn slightly, protecting her face and neck by curling inward. The impact knocked her completely off her feet. Pain exploded across her right shoulder as she hit the ground hard, the bear's weight pinning her. The backpack took some of the crushing force, but Alicia felt the air forced from her lungs. The grizzly's hot breath enveloped her, the smell of rotting meat and wild musk filling her nostrils. This is it, she thought with strange clarity. This is how I die. But the killing bite didn't come. Instead, the bear pressed its massive paw against her upper back, holding her in place. Alicia remained absolutely still, her face pressed into the rocky soil, breathing in short, shallow gasps. Every instinct screamed at her to struggle, to fight, to run, but she knew any movement might trigger the predator's chase response. Seconds stretched into minutes. The bear huffed and grunted above her, occasionally shifting its weight, but maintaining the pin. Alicia's right arm, trapped beneath her, began to throb with a sharp, insistent pain that suggested something was very wrong with her shoulder. Her left arm was extended outward, the hand still loosely gripping one trekking pole. The bear spray had fallen just beyond her reach. 10 minutes passed in this terrifying stasis. Alicia's mind cycled through prayers, regrets, and memories. She thought of her parents in Seattle, who had worried about this solo trip, her sister in Chicago, who was expecting her first child in December, a niece Alicia might never meet, her third-grade students, who had made her a card wishing her a great adventure with enthusiastic misspelling. The bear shifted again, its massive paw pressing harder for a moment, sending fresh waves of pain through Alicia's injured shoulder. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood. Then, inexplicably, the pressure lessened. The animal's breathing changed, becoming less agitated. Slowly, cautiously, Alicia turned her head just enough to see the grizzly with her peripheral vision. The bear was still there, still looming over her, but its attention had shifted. It was looking away from her, towards something in the distance, ears twitching, nostrils flaring. Another endless minute passed. Then, without warning, the bear stepped off her. Alicia remained absolutely motionless, afraid that any movement might renew the animal's interest. Through barely open eyes, she watched as the grizzly ambled a few feet away, sniffed the air again, then turned to look back at her. Their eyes met briefly, the bear's small dark eyes revealing nothing of its intentions, before it huffed one final time and moved away toward a thicket of brush downslope. Alicia didn't move for what felt like an eternity after the bear disappeared from view. Only when the silence had stretched so long that her racing heart began to slow did she finally allow herself to take a full breath. Pain shot through her chest, bruised or broken ribs, she guessed, but she was alive. With excruciating slowness, she tested her limbs. Her left arm and both legs seemed functional if scraped and bruised, but when she tried to move her right arm, white-hot agony tore through her shoulder, dislocated at minimum. She bit back a scream, tears springing to her eyes. Carefully, Alicia pushed herself up with her left arm until she was sitting. Her backpack was still attached, though partially crushed. The world spun momentarily and she closed her eyes until the dizziness passed. When she opened them again, she took stock of her surroundings. No sign of the bear. Her bear spray lay just a few feet away, alongside her dropped phone. The screen was cracked but lit up when she reached for it with her good hand. No service, of course. Alicia checked the time. 9:45 a.m. The encounter had lasted just over 20 minutes, though it had felt like hours. She needed to get back to the trailhead, but first, she needed to address her injuries enough to make hiking possible. Training kicked in. First priority, stay alert for the bear's return. Second, assess injuries. Third, create a plan to reach safety. Her right shoulder hung at an awkward angle, confirming her suspicion of dislocation. The pain was nauseating, pulsing with each heartbeat. Her ribs ached fiercely, and numerous scrapes and bruises were beginning to make themselves known across her body, but nothing seemed immediately life-threatening. No major bleeding, no signs of shock yet. Moving with deliberate care, Alicia used her good arm to retrieve the first aid kit from her backpack. She couldn't reset her own shoulder. That would require medical assistance, but she could fashion a sling to immobilize the joint and reduce pain. Using a triangular bandage and some safety pins, she created a makeshift support for her injured arm. The next challenge, getting back to the trailhead. She had completed roughly half the loop, meaning she could either continue forward or turn back the way she came. Forward would be shorter, but would also take her through unknown terrain. Back would be longer but familiar. She opted for the known path, reasoning that she'd already encountered the bear there and it had moved on. Standing up sent fresh waves of pain radiating from her shoulder, and for a moment, Alicia feared she might pass out. She leaned against a boulder, breathing through gritted teeth until the worst passed. Then, retrieving her bear spray and phone with her left hand, she began the slow journey back. Each step jostled her injuries, but Alicia established a rhythm that minimized the worst of it. She kept her right arm pressed against her body, using her left for balance. Without both trekking poles, the descent was treacherous, especially on loose scree and rocky sections. Twice she slipped, catching herself awkwardly and sending fresh spasms of agony through her shoulder. Progress was agonizingly slow. A trail that had taken her 2 hours to ascend now stretched interminably before her. She stopped frequently to rest, to check for signs of the bear, and to manage the increasing pain. Her water supply dwindled, faster than anticipated, the combination of stress, injury, and exertion dehydrating her more quickly than normal. By noon, Alicia had covered less than a mile. The sun beat down from directly overhead, its warmth initially welcome, but soon becoming another adversary as sweat soaked her clothes. The moisture chilled whenever the breeze picked up, sending shivers through her that wreaked havoc on her injured ribs and shoulder. One step at a time, she murmured to herself, a mantra that had gotten her through difficult hikes before, but none had been like this. None had involved dragging an injured body down a mountain after a grizzly attack. 3 hours into her descent, Alicia heard voices ahead. She paused, wondering if pain and exhaustion were causing hallucinations. But no. The sounds grew clearer. A group of hikers was ascending the trail toward her. "Hello," she called, her reality of human contact after her ordeal. "Grizzly." About 3 hours ago, further up the trail. The woman, who introduced herself as Melissa, took charge immediately. She happened to be a nurse from Fairbanks, visiting the park on her day off. "Let me look at that shoulder," she said, gently examining Alicia without removing the sling. "Definitely dislocated. Any other injuries?" "Ribs," Alicia winced, as Melissa's fingers probed gently, "and lots of bruises." The older of the two men, who identified himself as Ron, pulled out a satellite phone. "No cell service here, but this should work. I'll call park dispatch." While Ron made the call, Melissa helped Alicia sit down and offered her water and energy bars from their supplies. The younger man, Dave, kept watch for any signs of the bear's return. "They're sending rangers with a medical evacuation team," Ron reported after completing the call. "Should be here within an hour. They asked if you can continue downhill all to meet them partway." Alicia nodded, grateful for the rest but aware that staying mobile was safer than remaining in one spot. With Melissa's support on her left side and frequent rest stops, the group made slow but steady progress down the trail. True to Ron's estimate, they encountered 2 park rangers on the trail less than an hour later. One carried a larger medical kit, the other a rifle. Standard protocol for responding to a bear attack. "Ms. Park?" the female ranger approached, introducing herself as Sarah Winters. "We got the call about your encounter. Medical team is waiting at the trailhead with an ambulance. Think you can make it the rest of the way with our help? Or do you need a stretcher evacuation?" "I can walk," Alicia insisted, though each step had become increasingly painful. Pride and practicality warred within her. A stretcher evacuation would be complex on this terrain and would put more people at risk if the bear returned. Just need something stronger for the pain. Ranger Winters administered injectable ibuprofen from her medical kit, not as effective as prescription painkillers, but enough to take the edge off. After checking Alicia's vitals and ensuring her shoulder was properly immobilized, the rangers thanked the hiking group for their assistance. Ron, Melissa, and Dave continued their hike after extracting a promise from Alicia to let them know how she fared. The descent with the rangers was more efficient, their experience with the terrain and emergency situations evident in how they supported Alicia while maintaining awareness of their surroundings. Ranger Winters kept up a steady stream of questions, partly to assess Alicia's mental state, partly to gather information about the bear encounter. "You did everything right," Winters commented after Alicia described freezing and then playing dead once the bear made contact. "That's exactly the protocol for a defensive attack, which is what this sounds like. The bear was probably just as surprised as you were." "Doesn't make my shoulder feel any better," Alicia grimaced, though the ranger's words did provide some comfort. She hadn't made a fatal mistake. She'd just had extraordinarily bad luck. "The fact that you're walking and talking is testament to your quick thinking," the male ranger, whose name tag read Gonzalez, added. "We've seen far worse outcomes from bear encounters." By late afternoon, they reached the trailhead where an ambulance and several park vehicles waited. A small crowd had gathered, mostly park staff and a few curious tourists who'd heard snippets of radio communications about a bear attack. Paramedics took over Alicia's care immediately, transferring her to a gurney despite her weak protests that she could walk. The sudden relief of weight from her legs made her realize just how exhausted she was. Her entire body trembled with fatigue and residual adrenaline. "We're taking you to Fairbanks Memorial," the lead paramedic informed her as they loaded her into the ambulance. "It's the nearest facility with proper trauma capabilities about 2 hours from here." Inside the ambulance, the paramedics established an IV for fluids and pain medication, took her vitals, and performed a more thorough assessment of her injuries. The stronger painkillers began to work almost immediately, dulling the sharp agony in her shoulder to a more manageable throb. Before the ambulance departed, Ranger Winters climbed in briefly. "We'll need a full statement from you when you're feeling better," she said, "and I've contacted the owners of the bed and breakfast where you're staying. They said they'll secure your belongings until you're able to return." "Thank you," Alicia murmured, the medication making her thoughts fuzzy. "The bear, are you going to track it?" Winter's expression turned serious. We'll investigate the site and monitor the area, but unless the bear shows predatory behavior or approaches developed areas, we generally don't relocate or euthanize for a defensive encounter. She squeezed Alicia's good hand. Try to rest. Someone will check on you at the hospital tomorrow. The ambulance doors closed, and Alicia surrendered to the gentle sway of the vehicle as it navigated the park road. Through the drug-induced haze, she processed the ranger's words. The bear would likely continue its life undisturbed, fattening up, for winter hibernation, perhaps never encountering another human. There was something fitting about that, though Alicia couldn't quite articulate why through her medication fog. The 2-hour journey to Fairbanks passed in a blur of intermittent awareness. Alicia drifted between sleep and consciousness, the paramedics rousing her occasionally to check her responses. By the time they arrived at the hospital, twilight had fallen over the Alaskan landscape. The emergency department was relatively quiet when they wheeled her in. A trauma team was waiting, having been notified ahead of time about a wilderness injury. Alicia was transferred to an examination room where doctors began their assessment, gently cutting away her clothing to reveal the full extent of her injuries. "Ms. Park, I'm Dr. Natalie Chen," a woman in scrubs introduced herself, shining a penlight into Alicia's eyes to check pupillary response. "Can you tell me where you are?" "Fairbanks Memorial?" Alicia responded, the words feeling thick in her mouth. "Bear attack. Dislocated shoulder." "Good. We're going to take care of that." "Shoulder soon. But first we need some images to make sure there's no additional damage we can't see." Dr. Chen continued her examination, pressing gently along Alicia's ribs and noting her winces. "Definitely some rib injuries, possibly fractures. We'll x-ray those as well." The next hours passed in a parade of procedures. X-rays confirmed a dislocated right shoulder, 2 cracked ribs and multiple contusions, but no life-threatening internal injuries. The most difficult part came when, under sedation but not full anesthesia, doctors manipulated her. They admitted her overnight for observation, concerns about delayed shock, and the remoteness of her injuries warranting caution. A hospital volunteer helped her send brief messages to her family, enough to let them know she was injured, but stable, without causing undue panic. In the quiet hospital room, with darkness pressing against the windows and pain medication flowing through her veins, Alicia finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Tears came suddenly, silently, streaming down her face as her body released the tension it had held since the moment she'd spotted the grizzly on the trail. She didn't try to stop them. A nurse checking her vitals noticed, but didn't comment, simply offering tissues and a gentle pat on her good shoulder before dimming the lights. Alicia was grateful for the privacy to process her emotions without explanation or comfort. Some experiences had to be felt alone. She drifted into uneasy sleep, her dreams filled with the sensation of weight pressing her into the earth, of hot breath on her neck, of dark eyes watching her with wild indifference. Morning arrived with the bustle of shift change and breakfast trays. Alicia's head felt clearer, though her body protested every movement with sharp reminders of her encounter. A different doctor checked on her, reviewing her chart and examining her injuries in the harsh light of day. "Everything looks as good as can be expected," the doctor, a middle-aged man whose name tag read Dr. Marshall, informed her. "We'd like to keep you one more night just to be sure, but barring any complications, you should be able to leave tomorrow." "I need to figure out how to get back to Healy," Alicia said, suddenly remembering. "It counts for everything," Winters agreed. "I need to take your official statement about the encounter, if you're up to it. It helps us track bear behavior and improve safety protocols." For the next 30 minutes, Alicia recounted the experience in detail, where exactly she'd seen the bear, its behavior before it charged, her response, how long it had pinned her, and its demeanor before it finally moved away. Winters recorded the statement and took notes on a park service form. "Based on your description, this was almost certainly a defensive encounter," the ranger concluded. "You surprised each other, and the bear responded to perceived threat. The fact that it didn't inflict bite injuries and eventually lost interest supports this assessment." "So what happens now?" Alicia asked. "With the bear, I mean. We've posted warnings at all trailheads in the area and temporarily closed that section of the Savage Alpine Trail," Winters explained. "A wildlife team investigated the site yesterday evening and found evidence supporting your account. Bear tracks, some disturbance where you were pinned, and interestingly, the remains of a fresh caribou kill about 100 yards from where you encountered the bear. A kill? So that's what it was protecting? Winters nodded. Most likely. Bears are extremely defensive of food sources, especially this time of year when they're in hyperphagia, basically eating non-stop to prepare for hibernation. You inadvertently came between a hungry grizzly and its meal. The explanation made logical sense, but Alicia still struggled to reconcile the terrifying experience with such mundane natural behavior. Just a bear being a bear. Just a human in the wrong place at the wrong time. We'll maintain the trail closure for a few days and monitor for any unusual bear activity, Winters continued. But unless the animal shows signs of habituation or predatory behavior toward humans, no further action will be taken. I understand, Alicia said, and she did intellectually. The park existed to preserve wilderness, including its predators. One bear attack, especially a defensive rather than predatory one, didn't warrant intervention. Still, she couldn't help but imagine another hiker rounding that same bend, unaware of the danger. As if reading her thoughts, Winters added, "This encounter will be documented in our wildlife incident database and included in safety briefings. It's valuable information that helps keep others safe." After completing the paperwork, Winters addressed the practical concerns that had been nagging at Alicia. "I've spoken with Frank and Dorothy at the B&B. They're keeping your room and have your luggage secure. As for your rental car, one of our staff drove it back to park headquarters. Once you're discharged, we can arrange transportation to get you back to Healy." Relief washed over Alicia. The logistical hurdles had seemed insurmountable from her hospital bed. "Thank you, I don't know what I would have done otherwise." "That's part of our job," Winters smiled. "When things go sideways in the wilderness, we help put them right again, though usually with less paperwork involved." She stood to leave, but paused at the door. "Oh, and local news has gotten wind of the incident. We've released only basic information, but if reporters contact you, you're under no obligation to speak with them." The mention of news coverage added a layer of complexity Alicia hadn't considered. Her private ordeal, becoming public knowledge, felt almost invasive, though she recognized the educational value her experience might have for others. After Ranger Winters left, Alicia's day settled into the monotonous rhythm of hospital recovery. Physical therapists visited to demonstrate exercises she'd need to perform once her shoulder began healing. A social worker checked in to discuss potential psychological impacts of traumatic events and provide resources for support after she returned home. By evening, her phone had begun accumulating messages as word spread through her personal network. Her parents, already informed of the basics, pressed for more details and offered to fly to Alaska. Her sister expressed horror, mixed with relief. Colleagues from her school sent well wishes, promising to cover her classes until she returned. Social media notifications piled up as friends tagged her in news articles with headlines like, "Oregon teacher survives grizzly encounter in Denali." The local Fairbanks paper had run a small story, mostly factual, but with dramatic phrasing. "Woman pinned by massive grizzly survives harrowing ordeal." The article quoted park officials about increased bear activity, but mentioned Alicia only as an out-of-state visitor in her late 20s. Still, it was strange to see her experience reduced to a few paragraphs of newsprint, the terror and pain distilled into clinical language about wildlife management and visitor safety. A nurse brought an iPad so Alicia could respond to the most pressing messages. To her parents, she emphasized her stable condition and good prognosis, gently declining their offer to visit. To her school principal, she provided a tentative timeline. For return, at least 2 weeks for initial recovery, possibly longer depending on physical therapy requirements. To close friends, she sent brief updates promising more details when she felt stronger. That night, sleep came more easily, aided by pain medication and sheer exhaustion. Though the bear still stalked her dreams, the overwhelming fear had begun to transmute into something more complex. Respect, humility, even a strange sense of connection to the wild creature that had held her life in its paws and, for reasons she might never understand, chosen to spare her. The second morning in the hospital brought improved mobility and decreased pain. Dr. Chen returned to check her progress, seeming pleased with the initial healing. "We'll discharge you this afternoon if your pain remains manageable with oral medication," she informed Alicia. "But you'll need to take it very easy for at least 2 weeks. No lifting with that right arm, limited movement as per the physical therapist's instructions, and follow-up with an orthopedist when you get home. Discharge paperwork included prescriptions for pain management and inflammation, detailed care instructions for her injuries, and referrals to orthopedic specialists in Portland. A hospital case manager helped arrange transportation back to Healy, coordinating with the Park Service as Ranger Winters had promised. By mid-afternoon, Alicia was seated in the passenger side of a Park Service vehicle, her arms securely immobilized. Against her chest, a small bag of medications and supplies beside her. The driver, a young seasonal ranger named Tim, maintained cheerful conversation during the 2-hour journey, tactfully avoiding direct questions about her encounter while sharing his own stories of wildlife observations. The familiar sight of the Miller's Bed and Breakfast, a 2-story log cabin with bright blue trim, brought unexpected emotion welling up in Alicia's throat. Dorothy Miller was waiting on the porch, her round face creased with concern. "Oh, honey," she enveloped Alicia in a gentle hug, careful of her injuries. "When the Rangers told us what happened, we were beside ourselves with worry. Come in, come in. Frank's made his special chicken soup, and we've set up the downstairs guest room so you won't have to manage the stairs." The kindness of these near strangers brought fresh tears to Alicia's eyes. After thanking Ranger Tim for the ride, she allowed Dorothy to guide her inside, where the warmth and smell of home cooking created an atmosphere so normal, so safe, that the contrast with her wilderness ordeal felt almost surreal. Frank Miller, a tall man with a perpetual stoop and hands gnarled from decades of carpentry, greeted her with grandfatherly concern. "Damn bears," he muttered, though without real heat. "Nature's got teeth and claws, and sometimes we forget that until we're reminded the hard way." Over bowls of soup that Alicia managed to eat one-handed, the Millers updated her on the practical arrangements. Her rental car had been delivered to their property that morning. Her return flight wasn't for 3 more days, giving her time to rest before traveling. They'd spoken with the rental company about the damaged backpack and equipment, most of which had been retrieved by park staff. "And there's been calls," Dorothy mentioned hesitantly. "Reporters mostly. We didn't give them any information, just said you were recovering and needed privacy." "Thank you," Alicia said sincerely. The thought of explaining her experience repeatedly to strangers seeking sensational quotes exhausted her. "I'm not ready for that." "Don't blame you one bit," Frank nodded. "Vultures, the lot of them. Though," he added with a hint of pride, "you're something of a local celebrity now. Not many folks have a story like yours to tell." That night, in the comfortable downstairs bedroom, Alicia found herself scrolling through news coverage of her encounter. Most articles remained factual and brief, focused more on the park's response than on her specifically. But a few outdoor recreation blogs had picked up the story, embellishing with dramatic language about death-defying courage and facing nature's fury. One had even used a stock photo of a roaring grizzly with the caption, "Similar to the aggressive bear encountered by hiker," though the actual animal had never roared at her. Alicia clicked away from the coverage, disturbed by the narratives being constructed around her experience. Already, the reality was being shaped into something that fit preconceived ideas about wilderness encounters, either glorifying her ordinary survival instincts or demonizing the bear for behaving according to its nature. The following day brought improvements in her physical condition, but new challenges to her peace of mind. Word had spread in the small community of Healy, population barely over 1,000, and several locals stopped by the B&B with well wishes and, transparently, curiosity. Dorothy fielded most visitors with polite but firm boundaries, allowing only a few to briefly greet Alicia. Among those granted access was a local wilderness guide named Michael Runningwolf, whose Athabascan heritage and decades of experience in the Alaskan bush gave his visit a different quality than the others. He sat quietly in the Miller's living room, listening intently as Alicia recounted her experience without interruption or exclamation. When she finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "Bears remember," he said finally. "They know every inch of their territory, where they've found food, where they've encountered threats, where they feel safe. That bear will remember you and that place and that moment." "Is that supposed to be comforting?" Alicia asked, uncertain of his meaning. Michael smiled slightly. "It means you're part of the story now, the bear's story, the mountain's story. Not many people can say that." His perspective stayed with Alicia after he left. The idea that the encounter had meaning beyond random misfortune, that it connected her to the landscape and its inhabitants in some fundamental way, offered a framework for processing the experience that felt more authentic than the sensationalized news accounts. By her final day in Healy, Alicia had developed a routine that accommodated her injuries. She'd mastered one-handed dressing, discovered which positions allowed for relatively pain-free sleep, and learned to accept help without feeling diminished by it. The Millers had become surrogate family, their care extending beyond basic hospitality to genuine concern for her well-being. Frank drove her to the small regional airport the next morning, her belongings packed in the same suitcase she'd arrived with less than a week earlier. The trip that had begun as a solo adventure-seeking wilderness solitude was ending with a network of connections she hadn't anticipated, to the park rangers who'd helped her, to the medical team who'd treated her, to the Millers who'd cared for her, even to the bear that had changed her understanding of her place in the natural world. "You take care now," Frank said gruffly at the departure gate, surprising her with a careful hug. "And come back someday when you're healed up. Alaska's got more to show you than the backside of a grizzly." The journey home to Portland involved multiple flights and lengthy layovers, each transition requiring Alicia to navigate the challenges of travel with limited mobility. Fellow passengers stared curiously at her immobilized arm, some bold enough to ask what happened. She developed a simplified response, hiking accident in Alaska, that satisfied most without inviting further questions. Her parents met her at Portland International Airport, their faces a mixture of relief and lingering worry. Her mother, Grace, fussed over her appearance, noting the weight she'd lost and the pallor beneath her tan. Her father, James, handled her luggage with the careful efficiency of a man accustomed to practical problems rather than emotional ones. "How you're staying with us until you can manage on your own," Grace announced, a statement rather than an offer. Alicia, too exhausted to argue and privately relieved not to face her empty apartment alone, simply nodded. The Park family home in suburban Portland became Alicia's recovery sanctuary for the next 2 weeks. Her childhood bedroom, preserved in a state of suspended adolescence despite her years away, felt both comforting and strange. Posters of national parks and wilderness areas adorned the walls, including, she noted with irony, one of Denali with a grizzly bear prominently featured in the foreground. Recovery proceeded in incremental improvements. The orthopedic specialist confirmed Dr. Chen's prognosis. With proper rehabilitation, her shoulder would likely regain full function, though complete healing would take months rather than weeks. Physical therapy began with gentle exercises that nonetheless left her sweating and exhausted. The bruises on her body faded from angry purple to sickly yellow, then disappeared entirely, while the deeper pain of damaged muscles and tendons persisted. Throughout her recovery, Alicia found herself increasingly preoccupied with understanding and processing what had happened. She researched bear behavior obsessively, reading scientific papers on ursid cognition and territorial patterns. She joined online forums for survivors of wildlife attacks, finding both comfort and distress in others' stories. She reached out to Ranger Winters for updates on bear activity in the area where she'd been attacked. "The trail has reopened," Winters told her during a phone call about 3 weeks after the incident. "We've had no further reports of aggressive bear behavior in that location. Wildlife teams believe the animal has moved to higher elevations following food sources, which is typical for this time of year as hibernation approaches. So there's been no consequences. For the bear, I mean," Alicia clarified, unsure why this mattered to her. "No, and that's a good thing," Winters explained patiently. "It means the bear is behaving normally, following natural patterns. When we have to intervene, relocate or euthanize, it usually indicates a breakdown in the natural order, often human-caused." The conversation left Alicia contemplating her own place in that natural order. Her attack hadn't been personal. She had been neither targeted nor specifically spared. She had simply been another element in the wilderness, subject to its laws and rhythms like any other creature. 6 weeks after the attack, Alicia returned to teaching. Her shoulder remained in a less restrictive brace, and her movement was limited, but she could manage classroom activities with minor accommodations. Her third-grade students were simultaneously fascinated by her adventure and refreshingly unconcerned with its deeper implications. To them, her story was exciting but ultimately simple. Miss Park met a bear, got hurt and got better. It was during a science lesson about ecosystems that Alicia found herself sharing more of her experience than she'd planned. As the children diligently created food web diagrams, a boy named Tyler raised his hand. "Ms. Park, were you scared when the bear attacked you?" he asked, his genuine curiosity free from the ghoulish undertone adults often brought to the same question. The classroom went silent. 24 children suddenly riveted. "Yes," Alicia answered honestly. "I was terrified, but I also understood something important in that moment. The bear wasn't being mean or evil. It was being a bear. It thought I might be a threat to its food or its safety, so it reacted the way bears have evolved to react over millions of years." "Did you hate the bear after?" a girl named Sophia asked. Alicia considered this. "No, I couldn't hate it for being what it is. That would be like hating the rain for making you wet or the sun for burning you if you stay out too long. Nature isn't good or bad. It just is." The children absorbed this with varying degrees of comprehension, but something about the simplicity required to explain it to them clarified Alicia's own feelings. She didn't hate the bear. She didn't even fear it exactly, though she respected its power. What lingered was a sense of profound encounter, of having briefly intersected with a wild consciousness utterly different from her own. That evening, sitting on her apartment balcony watching the sunset, Alicia made a decision. She opened her laptop and composed an email to a local organization that hosted TEDx events. The subject line read, "Speaker Proposal. What a grizzly bear taught me about survival, fear, and coexistence." To her surprise, the organizers responded enthusiastically. 2 weeks later, she found herself in a meeting discussing the parameters of a 15-minute talk scheduled for their spring event, 6 months in the future. "Your experience offers such rich metaphorical territory," the program director enthused. "The balance between wilderness preservation and human safety, the nature of fear, the limits of control, all wrapped in a compelling personal narrative." Preparing the talk became a form of therapy. As Alicia drafted and refined her message, she processed her experience in new ways, finding meaning and perspective that had eluded her in the immediate aftermath. Her physical recovery continued alongside this psychological integration, her range of motion improving, pain diminishing, strength returning through diligent therapy. By early spring, as the date of her TEDx talk approached, Alicia had regained approximately 90% function in her shoulder. The orthopedist pronounced her recovery remarkable, attributing it to her pre-existing physical fitness and commitment to rehabilitation. The only permanent souvenirs were a slight catch when she raised her arm above shoulder height and a handful of small scars where the bear's claws had broken skin. The day of the talk arrived with unexpected calm. Standing backstage at the renovated theater hosting the event, Alicia felt a curious absence of nerves. After facing a grizzly bear, a human audience, even one of several hundred, held little terror. When the host announced her name, Alicia walked onto the stage with steady confidence. The spotlight felt warm on her face as she took position on the circular red carpet emblematic of TED events. Her opening line, "The grizzly bear that could have killed me weighed approximately 700 pounds, captured immediate attention. For the next 15 minutes, she guided the audience through her experience, from the moment of encounter through her recovery and the perspective she'd gained. She spoke of the bear not as an antagonist, but as a fellow being navigating its own imperatives. She described the moment of being pinned, not with horror but with humility, the recognition of her own vulnerability and insignificance in the face of natural forces. "What I learned from those 20 minutes beneath a grizzly bear," she concluded, "wasn't just how to survive a bear attack. It was how to understand my place in a world that doesn't revolve around human concerns. The bear that pinned me wasn't evil. It was just being a bear. And in learning to accept that, I found a strange kind of peace. Not because the world is safe, it isn't and never will be, but because once you truly accept that fact, you can stop wasting energy on the illusion of control and start appreciating the raw, beautiful truth of being alive in a world full of teeth and claws and wonder." The applause was enthusiastic, the feedback afterward overwhelmingly positive. The talk was recorded and eventually uploaded to the TEDx YouTube channel, where it gradually accumulated views, not viral numbers, but a steady stream of people connecting with her story. In the months that followed, Alicia received emails and messages from around the country. Some came from fellow survivors of wilderness encounters, others from people facing entirely different challenges who nonetheless found resonance in her experience of vulnerability and resilience. A few came from wildlife biologists and park rangers, appreciating her balanced portrayal of the predator that had nearly taken her life. Gradually, Alicia found herself invited to speak at other events, outdoor education conferences, conservation fundraisers, community college symposiums. She never sought to become a professional speaker, maintaining her teaching career as her primary focus, but she welcomed these opportunities to share a perspective that felt increasingly important in a world where humans and wilderness existed in uneasy proximity. 1 year after the attack, Alicia returned to Alaska, not to Denali, she wasn't quite ready for that, but to a wilderness lodge near Sitka, where she participated in a workshop on coexistence with large predators. There, she met biologists, guides, indigenous knowledge keepers, and other survivors. The conversations deepened her understanding and reinforced her evolving perspective on her experience. It was during this trip that she first used the bear hugs line in her dating profile. Back in Portland, having finally felt ready to consider romance again after her recovery had consumed so much energy, Alicia had created accounts on several dating apps. Under the deal breakers section of one profile, she'd written with dry humor, "Bear hugs, the literal kind, not the affectionate human version." The line invariably sparked conversation, giving her an opening to share as much or as little of her story as felt appropriate. Physical intimacy presented unexpected challenges. The first time a date, a kind, patient high school science teacher named Ryan embraced her from behind. Alicia experienced a flash of panic so intense she had to step away, breathing heavily. As her mind momentarily returned to being pinned beneath the grizzly, Ryan's understanding response, giving her space without making her feel broken, was the first indication that he might become important in her life. As their relationship developed, Alicia found herself navigating not only the physical echoes of trauma but also the strange celebrity her bear encounter had created. When they attended social gatherings together, someone inevitably recognized her from her TEDx talk or local news coverage and wanted to hear the bear story. Ryan developed a knack for reading her cues, stepping in when she'd reached her limit for reliving the experience. "It's strange," she told him one evening as they walked along the Willamette River, nearly 2 years after the attack. "That 20 minutes with the bear has somehow become one of the defining events of my life even, though it's such a tiny fraction of my existence." Some experiences are like that, Ryan reflected. They have a weight that isn't measured in minutes or hours. The weight, that was the paradox of it. The physical weight of the bear pinning her had been crushing, terrifying, nearly fatal, but the metaphorical weight of the experience had become something else entirely, a ballast that grounded her, a perspective that clarified priorities, a story that connected her to others in unexpected ways. On the second anniversary of the attack, Alicia received an email from Ranger Sarah Winters. The message was brief but meaningful. "Thought you might want to know, wildlife cameras recorded a female grizzly with 2 cubs in the area of your encounter this summer. Can't confirm it's the same bear, of course, but the size and markings suggest it could be. Life goes on in the wild and elsewhere. Hope you're well." Alicia sat with this information for a long time, imagining the bear, perhaps the same one that had held her life in its paws, now leading its own young through the wilderness, teaching them to forage, to avoid humans when possible, to defend themselves when necessary. There was something fitting about this continuation, this cycle of wild existence proceeding indifferent to human narratives, yet somehow intertwined with her own story. That evening, she added a final slide to her most recent presentation, scheduled for an upcoming outdoor retailer convention. A simple wildlife camera image of a grizzly with cubs, captured from behind as they moved away into dense brush. Beneath it, she typed a simple caption: "We all keep walking into our futures, carrying what we've learned along the way." The bear that had nearly killed her had long since disappeared into the vastness of the Alaskan wilderness, its brief interaction with her forgotten as it followed ancient rhythms of survival. But the weight of those 20 minutes remained with Alicia, not as a burden, but as a strange gift, a perspective earned through pain and fear that had somehow transformed into wisdom and connection. And if sometimes in her dreams she still felt hot breath on her neck and the crushing weight of wild power holding her against the earth, well, that too was part of the story. The memory, like her physical scars, would fade, but never completely disappear, just as it should be, she had come to believe. Some encounters leave their mark forever, reminding us that we are all ultimately just passing through a world that existed long before us and will continue long after we're gone, a world with teeth and claws and beauty beyond measure. Now let's move on to the story of the next survivor. Roy Dixon drummed his fingers against the worn steering wheel of his Peterbilt 389, the rhythm matching the country song playing softly on the radio. The vast Idaho landscape stretched before him as Highway 21 wound its way through the Sawtooth mountain range. The late September sun cast long shadows across the asphalt, and Roy's eyes burned from 15 straight hours on the road. He'd been hauling produce from Washington State to a distribution center in Boise, and the familiar fatigue was settling into his bones. At 44, Roy had spent nearly half his life as a long-haul trucker. The job had cost him a marriage, countless missed birthdays, and the permanent crook in his lower back, but there was still something about the open road that called to him. Freedom, maybe. The simple clarity of a destination and a deadline. Point A to point B with nothing but himself and 16 wheels to get the job done. Just another hour, he muttered to himself, glancing at the GPS mounted on his dashboard. He shifted in his seat, trying to alleviate the pressure on his sciatic nerve. The load of apples, pears, and other assorted produce in his trailer would keep another day if necessary, but Roy prided himself on punctuality. 22 years on. The road? And he'd never been late for a delivery unless the weather made the roads impassable. His stomach growled, reminding him that the ham sandwich and coffee he'd had 6 hours ago at a truck stop in Stanley had long since worn off. He considered pushing through to Boise, but a quick glance at his legally mandated logbook told him what he already knew. He needed to stop soon or risk a violation. The Sawtooth rest area was coming up in about 10 miles, according to a blue sign on the roadside. That would do. Roy eased off the accelerator as he approached the turnoff for the rest area. The place was familiar to him, a regular stop on his Idaho routes. It wasn't much, a handful of parking spaces sized for big rigs, some picnic tables scattered among ponderosa pines, and restrooms that were clean enough if you didn't look too closely at the floors. But it was quiet, especially this time of year, when tourist traffic had thinned out after Labor Day. He guided the massive truck into the commercial vehicle section of the lot, which was empty, save for a single white Freightliner parked at the far end. Roy backed his rig into a spot that gave him a clear view of the mountains through his windshield. He cut the engine and sat for a moment, savoring the sudden silence. His ears rang slightly, an occupational hazard from years of highway noise. He reached for his logbook and made the appropriate notation, then stretched his arms above his head, feeling his vertebrae pop in satisfying succession. The air was crisp when Roy stepped down from the cab, carrying the unmistakable scent of pine and approaching autumn. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with something other than recirculated air conditioning. A glance at his watch told him it was just past 4:30 p.m. He had enough hours left in his driving day to make it to Boise if he kept this stop short. Roy grabbed a small cooler from behind his seat and made his way to one of the picnic tables. He'd packed some provisions at the start of his haul: water, bottles, pre-made sandwiches, and a couple of apples from the very orchards where he'd picked up his load. He wasn't supposed to sample the merchandise, of course, but the foreman at the orchard was an old friend who always slipped him a few pieces of the best fruit. As he sat at the weathered wooden table, Roy pulled out a slightly bruised apple and bit into it, the tart sweetness flooding his mouth. He chewed slowly, gazing at the jagged mountain peaks that gave the Sawtooth Range its name. Something about their rugged permanence always made his troubles seem smaller. 20 years of driving past them, and they hadn't changed a bit, while he'd grown older, grayer, and more worn down by the miles. The core of the apple was all that remained after a few minutes. Without thinking, Roy tossed it toward the tree line about 30 yards away. A harmless habit, biodegradable waste returning to nature. He'd done it countless times before at rest stops across the country. He followed the apple with a turkey sandwich and a bottle of water, then decided to use the restroom before getting back on the road. The facilities were empty, which suited Roy fine. He'd never been much for small talk, especially not in bathrooms. When he emerged, he took another moment to stretch his legs, walking the perimeter of the parking area to work out the stiffness in his joints. The sun was lowering behind the mountains now, painting the sky in broad strokes of orange and purple. There was something about Idaho sunsets that never got old, no matter how many times Roy witnessed them. He thought briefly about taking a picture with his phone to send to his daughter, Melissa, who lived in Arizona with her. Mother? At 16, she probably wouldn't care about a sunset photo from her old man, but he considered it anyway. Before he could pull out his phone, though, movement at the edge of the forest caught his eye. At first, he thought it might be a large dog. But as the shape emerged further from the trees, Roy realized he was looking at a black bear. It wasn't huge, probably a younger adult, if he had to guess, but still substantial enough to command respect. Roy had seen bears from the safety of his truck many times over the years, but rarely this close on foot. He froze, remembering the wilderness safety talks that were common in these parts. The bear didn't seem to notice him at first. It ambled toward the spot where Roy had tossed his apple core, nose to the ground following the scent. Roy slowly began backing toward his truck, careful not to make sudden movements. The bear found the apple core and snapped it up in one quick motion. "Easy there, buddy," Roy whispered, more to calm himself than the bear. "Just enjoying a snack, same as me." The bear's head swiveled toward him, ears perked up. It seemed more curious than aggressive, but Roy wasn't taking any chances. He continued his careful retreat toward the safety of his truck. The bear watched him for a moment, then returned its attention to the ground, presumably searching for more food. Roy made it back to his truck without incident, climbed into the cab, and locked the doors. His heart was beating faster than he cared to admit. Through the windshield, he could see the bear still nosing around near the tree line. He started the engine, thinking the noise might discourage the animal from hanging around, but the bear barely looked up. "That's enough excitement for one day," Roy muttered, putting the truck in gear. As he pulled away from the rest stop, he glanced in his side mirror to see the bear disappearing back into the forest. A brief encounter, nothing more. Still, it was a reminder that out here, humans were guests in wilderness territory. Roy drove the remaining distance to Boise without further incident, his mind occasionally drifting back to the bear. By the time he reached the distribution center, the encounter had faded into just another story from the road, one he might share with fellow drivers over coffee sometime. After dropping his load and completing the necessary paperwork, Roy checked into a modest motel near the interstate. It was almost 8 p.m. and he was dead tired. He'd been assigned a pickup of electronic components first thing in the morning for delivery to Salt Lake City. The room was basic but clean. A queen bed, a small desk, a TV he probably wouldn't watch, and a bathroom with decent water pressure. Roy had stayed in hundreds of similar rooms over the years. They all blurred together after a while. He took a hot shower, letting the water soothe his aching muscles, then called in an order for pizza delivery. While waiting, he called his daughter. The conversation was brief and somewhat stilted, typical for their relationship these days. Melissa was busy with homework and friends, her life increasingly separate from his. Roy didn't blame her. He'd been an inconsistent presence at best, limited to phone calls and the occasional weekend visit when his roots took him near Phoenix. After hanging up, Roy flipped through channels until the pizza arrived. He ate mechanically, more out of necessity than enjoyment, then set his alarm for 5 a.m. and turned in early. Sleep came quickly, as it usually did after a long day on the road. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Roy was up before his alarm, showered and checked out of the motel by 5:30. He stopped at a drive-thru for coffee and an egg sandwich, then headed to the warehouse to pick up his new load. The routine was familiar. Check in at the security gate, back up to the loading dock, verify the manifest, sign the paperwork. By 7:15, he was back on the road, headed south toward Utah. The drive would take about 5 hours in good conditions. Roy settled in, sipping his coffee and listening to a sports talk radio show discussing the previous night's football game. The cab of his truck was his second home, customized over the years with small comforts. A good seat cushion, a small collection of family photos taped to the dashboard, a satellite radio subscription that kept him company through the lonely stretches. He had just passed Mountain Home when his dispatcher called through the truck's Bluetooth system. "Morning, Roy," came Debbie's familiar voice. "How's the road treating you today?" "Can't complain," Roy replied, which was his standard answer regardless of how he actually felt. "What's up?" "Got a schedule change for you. The Salt Lake delivery's been pushed to tomorrow morning. Customer had some inventory system issue they're sorting out. They don't want the shipment until 9 a.m. tomorrow." Roy frowned. "So what am I supposed to do?" Sit around Salt Lake all night? Actually, I've got something better. We've got a rush pickup in Twin Falls that needs to go to the same facility in Salt Lake. If you can swing by there first, you can combine the loads and still make your delivery window tomorrow. Roy did a quick mental calculation. Twin Falls would add about 2 hours to his route today, but it would fill what would otherwise be dead time. Sure, I can handle that. Send me the details. Already coming through to your tablet. Thanks, Roy. You're a lifesaver. Roy grunted an acknowledgement and ended the call. The navigation system recalculated his route, directing him to take I-84 west toward Twin Falls instead of continuing south. He made the adjustment automatically, his hands guiding the big rig with the ease of long practice. The new route would take him back through familiar territory, including parts of the Sawtooth National Recreation Area. It wasn't his favorite detour, but the extra miles meant extra pay, and Roy wasn't one to turn down good money. He switched the radio to a classic rock station and settled in for the longer haul. By mid-afternoon, Roy had picked up the additional cargo in Twin Falls, a shipment of specialized medical equipment bound for a hospital in Salt Lake City, and was headed back east. The revised route would take him past the same rest area where he'd spotted the bear the previous day. Roy didn't give it much thought as he approached the turnoff. He'd been driving for about 6 hours since his morning start and could use a quick break. The rest area was busier than it had been the previous evening. A couple of family cars, an RV and another semi were parked in the various sections. Roy pulled into an empty truck space and shut down the engine. His back was killing him, a familiar complaint that had grown worse in recent years. He took 2 ibuprofen with a swig of water, then stepped down from the cab to stretch his legs. The day was warmer than yesterday, the sun bright overhead in a clear blue sky. Roy used the restroom, then decided to eat the sandwich he'd picked up at a gas station in Twin Falls. He sat at the same picnic table as before, unwrapping the cellophane from a mediocre turkey and Swiss on white bread. A family was packing up their picnic at a neighboring table, parents corralling 2 energetic kids who'd clearly been cooped up in the car too long. The father nodded at Roy in the universal greeting of strangers sharing public space. Roy nodded back, then returned his attention to his lunch. As he ate, Roy found himself scanning the tree line where he'd seen the bear yesterday. There was no sign of wildlife now, just the gentle swaying of pines in the light breeze. He finished his sandwich and, remembering yesterday's encounter, deliberately walked to a trash can to dispose of the wrapper properly. Roy checked his watch. He had plenty of time to reach the hotel he'd booked in Tremonton, just across the Utah border, before nightfall. He could afford a few more minutes of fresh air before continuing. He walked a short trail that looped around the rest area, working out the kinks in his legs and lower back. When he returned to his truck, Roy decided he would rest for just a bit longer in his sleeper cab before hitting the road again. The sleeper behind the driver's compartment was Roy's true home on wheels, a compact space containing a twin bed, small storage cabinets, and even a tiny refrigerator. He'd customized it over the years with a better mattress than the factory issue and blackout curtains that could turn day to night when he needed to sleep odd hours. Roy climbed into the cab, closed the driver's door, and made his way to the sleeper compartment. He didn't bother locking the doors. He'd only be resting for 20 minutes or so, and the truck was in a public area in broad daylight. He lay down on the bed, setting an alarm on his phone for a short power nap. The accumulated fatigue of back-to-back long drives caught up with him almost immediately, and he drifted off to sleep within minutes. Roy wasn't sure what woke him first, the sound or the smell. His eyes snapped open to dim light filtering through the cab's windows. His first disoriented thought was that he'd slept much longer than intended, as the light had the golden quality of late afternoon. Before he could reach for his phone to check the time, he registered the smell, a powerful, musky animal odor that didn't belong in his truck. Then came the sound, a low snuffling and scratching noise coming from the front of the cab. Roy froze, instantly alert, adrenaline flooding his system. Something was in his truck, something large. Moving as quietly as possible, Roy shifted to peer through the gap in the privacy curtain separating the sleeper from the main cab. What he saw made his blood run cold. A black bear, possibly the same one from yesterday, though larger than he remembered, was half inside his truck, having somehow opened the passenger door. The animal was snuffling around the front seat, powerful nose twitching as it investigated the cab. Roy's mind raced. The bear must have picked up the scent of food. He tried to remember if he'd left anything edible in the front. There might have been an energy bar in the center console, or maybe some beef jerky in the glove compartment. Whatever it was, it had been enough to attract the bear's attention. He had no weapon, not even a pocket knife, within reach. His only hope was to stay perfectly still and pray the bear took what it wanted and left. But even as he formed this thought, the bear's head swiveled toward the sleeper compartment, dark eyes fixing on the gap in the curtain where Roy was watching. Their gazes locked, and Roy felt a primal fear unlike anything he'd experienced in his 4+ decades of life. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, neither moved. Then the bear made a huffing sound and began pushing, its considerable bulk further into the cab, moving toward the sleeper compartment. "Hey!" Roy shouted, instinctively trying to scare the animal away. "Get out of here!" The bear paused, seemingly startled by the sudden noise, but didn't retreat. Instead, it made a low, rumbling sound deep in its throat. Not quite a growl, but not a friendly noise either. Roy looked frantically around the sleeper for anything he could use as a deterrent. His gaze fell on the air horn button on the wall near his bed, a secondary horn control installed so he could signal without returning to the driver's seat if needed. Without hesitation, he slammed his palm against it. The blaring horn shattered the quiet afternoon, loud enough to hurt Roy's ears in the confined space. The bear jerked back in surprise, bumping against the steering wheel. For a moment, Roy thought the noise had worked as the animal half-turned toward the open door. But then, perhaps confused and frightened by the continuing noise, the bear lunged forward instead, crashing through the privacy curtain into the sleeper compartment. Roy barely had time to throw his arms up before 300 pounds of panicked bear was upon him. He felt the shocking weight as the animal trampled across the bed, claws tearing through the mattress and blankets. The confined space of the sleeper cab worked against both of them. The bear couldn't fully stand or maneuver, and Roy had nowhere to retreat. "Help!" Roy shouted, though he knew it was likely futile. The bear, frantic to escape the unfamiliar environment and the continuing blare of the horn, thrashed wildly. A powerful paw struck Roy's left arm as he tried to shield his face, the claws slicing through his shirt sleeve and into flesh. Roy screamed in pain, the sound lost beneath the horn and the bear's panicked huffs. In desperation, Roy kicked out hard, his work boot connecting with the bear's flank. The animal responded with a swipe. That caught Roy across the chest, shredding his shirt and leaving burning trails of pain. The metallic scent of blood, his own, filled Roy's nostrils, mingling with the overpowering smell of the bear. The next few moments were chaos: fur, claws, blood, and pain. Roy fought with the desperate strength of a man facing death, punching and kicking at the animal while trying to protect his vital areas. The bear bit down on his left forearm, teeth sinking through muscle. The pain was excruciating, white-hot and all-consuming. Roy's vision blurred, darkness creeping at the edges. Just when Roy was certain he would die in the sleeper cab of his own truck, the bear suddenly released his arm and scrambled back, seemingly as desperate to escape as Roy was to have it gone. The animal backed awkwardly through the torn curtain, bumping and crashing against the interior of the cab. Roy lay bleeding and gasping on his shredded bed, unable to do more than watch as the bear finally found its way back to the passenger. Doran half fell, half jumped out of the truck. Through the cab windows, he could see the animal lumbering quickly away, heading for the tree line without looking back. The air horn was still blaring. With tremendous effort, Roy reached out with his uninjured right arm and pressed the button, again silencing the deafening noise. The sudden quiet was almost as shocking as the horn had been. For several moments, Roy couldn't move. The pain was overwhelming, radiating from his left arm, chest, and various other points of contact with the bear's teeth and claws. He knew he was bleeding badly, could feel the warmth of it soaking into what remained of his clothing and bedding. But the rational part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through winter storms and mountain passes and midnight drives, told him that if he didn't move now, he might not get another chance. With a groan that turned into a sob, Roy pushed himself up. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, the sleeve of his flannel shirt dark with blood. His chest burned where the bear's claws had raked him. He fumbled for his phone with his good hand and was relieved to find it still in his pocket, undamaged in the attack. Roy's fingers left bloody smears on the screen as he dialed 911. It took 3 attempts to hit the right numbers. When the dispatcher answered, Roy's voice came out as a croak. "Bear attack is Sawtooth Rest area on Highway 21. I'm hurt bad." "Sir, did you say a bear attack?" The dispatcher's voice was professionally calm, but couldn't quite hide the note. To have surprise. "Yes," Roy managed. "Black bear in my truck. I'm a trucker. It got in somehow. I'm bleeding." "I'm sending emergency services to your location right now," the dispatcher said. "Can you tell me your name and exactly where you are at the rest area?" "Roy Dixon," he replied. "I'm in my truck, a blue Peterbilt, in the commercial vehicle section. Are you safe now, Roy? Is the bear gone?" "Gone? Yeah, ran off." Roy glanced nervously at the open passenger door, half expecting to see the bear returning, but there was no sign of the animal. "I need to close my door." "If you can do so safely, that would be good," the dispatcher agreed. "But don't push yourself if it might cause more harm." Roy stumbled to the front of the cab, nearly passing out from the movement. Using his good arm, he reached across and pulled the passenger door closed, then collapsed into the driver's seat. The interior of his truck looked like a crime scene. Blood smeared across the sleeper curtain, the seats, the steering wheel where his hand had touched it. "Doors closed," Roy reported, his voice growing weaker. How long until help gets here?" "Emergency services have been dispatched and are en route to your location. It should be about 15 minutes. I need you to stay on the line with me, okay, Roy? Can you tell me about your injuries?" Roy looked down at himself, trying to assess the damage through the fog of shock and pain. "My left arm's torn up bad. Bite wounds, chest has claw marks, bleeding a lot. Feel dizzy. I understand. We need to try to slow that bleeding. Do you have a first aid kit or anything you can use as a bandage?" Roy thought about the small first aid kit in the storage compartment under the passenger seat. It seemed miles away, though it was only a few feet. "Under the seat," he muttered. "Can't reach it right now." "That's okay. What about your clothing? Is there something you can use to press against the worst wounds?" With his good hand, Roy managed to remove what remained of his flannel shirt, biting back cries of pain as the fabric pulled away from the wounds on his chest. He balled up a relatively clean section of the shirt and pressed it against his mangled forearm, which seemed to be bleeding the most profusely. "Got my shirt on it," he told the dispatcher. "Hurts like hell." "You're doing great, Roy. I know it's painful, but keeping pressure on the wound is important. Help is on the way. I'm going to stay on the line with you until they arrive, okay?" "Okay," Roy whispered, struggling against the growing urge to close his eyes. He knew that giving in to that urge could be dangerous. Instead, he focused on the dispatcher's voice as she asked him questions. His age, his medical history, whether he had any allergies. Simple questions designed to keep him conscious and talking. Outside, Roy could hear activity in the rest area, voices calling back and forth, a child crying, a car door slamming. He wondered vaguely if anyone had seen the bear, or if they were reacting to the sight of blood on the exterior of his truck. He couldn't summon the energy to call out for help. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, though Roy's phone told him only 12 minutes had passed since his call. He was growing colder, a bad sign he recognized from first aid training all truck drivers received. Shock was setting in. "Dizzy," he mumbled to the dispatcher. "Cold. Roy, I need you to stay with me," the dispatcher said, her voice more urgent now. "Emergency services are very close, just a few more minutes. Can you hear any sirens yet?" Roy listened and thought he could detect a faint wailing in the distance. "Maybe," he replied. "Not sure." "That's them coming for you. You're doing great. Just hold on a little longer." The sirens grew louder, and then Roy could see flashing lights through his windshield. The cavalry had arrived, an ambulance and what looked like a sheriff's department vehicle pulling into the rest area. "They're here," Roy told the dispatcher, relief washing over him. "Great job, Roy. I'm going to stay on the line until they reach you, okay?" "Okay." Roy's voice was barely audible now, even to himself. He watched through half-lidded eyes as paramedics jumped out of the ambulance, directed by someone toward his truck. A moment later, there was a sharp knock on his driver's side door. "Sir, can you open the door? It's emergency services." Roy tried to reach for the door handle but couldn't coordinate his movements. "It's unlocked," he managed to say, hoping they could hear him. The door swung open, and suddenly his cab was filled with activity. A female paramedic climbing in beside him, another. At the door, voices calling for equipment, gloved hands gently moving his own hand away from his makeshift bandage to assess the damage. "Bear attack," Roy explained unnecessarily, his words slurring. "Got in my truck." "We know," the paramedic beside him said, her voice calm and professional. "You're going to be okay. We're going to take care of you." Roy finally let go of the phone, hearing the dispatcher's voice faintly wishing him well before someone ended the call. The paramedics worked quickly, applying pressure bandages to his arm and chest, starting an IV line, taking his vitals. Their voices seemed to come from far away now, technical terms mixing with urgent instructions. BP dropping. Multiple lacerations, possible tendon damage. Get the backboard ready. "Sir, can you tell me your name again?" "Roy," he managed. "Roy Dixon." "Good, Roy. We're going to move you to the ambulance now. You've lost a lot of blood, but we're going to take good care of you. Just stay with us, okay?" Roy tried to nod, but wasn't sure if he succeeded. The next few minutes were a blur of movement and pain as they carefully extracted him from the truck. Cab and transferred him to a backboard, then a gurney. The afternoon sun seemed blindingly bright after the dimness of the truck interior. As they wheeled him toward the waiting ambulance, Roy caught glimpses of concerned faces, other travelers at the rest stop who had gathered at a respectful distance, watched over by a sheriff's deputy who was keeping them back. "My truck," Roy mumbled as they prepared to load him into the ambulance. "Can't leave it." "Don't worry about your truck right now, sir," the paramedic told him. "The sheriff's department will secure it. Let's focus on getting you treated." Roy wanted to protest. The truck contained not just his livelihood, but also his personal belongings, his home away from home, but he didn't have the strength. As they lifted the gurney into the ambulance, darkness finally overtook him, and he slipped into unconsciousness. Roy's next awareness was of rhythmic beeping and the antiseptic smell that could only be a hospital. He opened his eyes slowly, blinking against harsh fluorescent lighting. He was in a hospital bed, his left arm heavily bandaged and immobilized, an IV line running into his right arm, and monitors attached to his chest, which was also covered in bandages. A nurse noticed. He was awake and approached the bed. "Welcome back, Mr. Dixon. How are you feeling?" "Like I went 10 rounds with a bear," Roy croaked, his throat dry and scratchy. "And lost." The nurse smiled at his attempt at humor. "Well, you didn't lose, since you're here to tell the tale. Let me get you some water." She held a cup with a straw to his lips, and Roy drank gratefully. "The doctor will be in to see you shortly. You're at St. Luke's in Boise. Do you remember what happened?" The memories flooded back. The bear in his truck, the terrifying struggle in the confined space of his sleeper cab, the pain and blood. "Bear attack," Roy confirmed. "At the rest stop. How long have I been here?" "About 6 hours. You were brought in by ambulance this afternoon and taken straight to surgery. It's just after 10 p.m. now." Roy absorbed this information as the nurse checked his vitals and made notes in a tablet. "Surgery. Dr. Patel can explain everything, but you had some pretty significant injuries to your left arm that needed repair. You also received a lot of stitches for lacerations to your chest and shoulder." Before Roy could ask more questions, a doctor entered the room, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and a confident manner. "Mr. Dixon, I'm Dr. Patel. I performed your surgery earlier today. It's good to see you awake." She picked up his chart and reviewed it briefly. "How's your pain level on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the worst pain imaginable?" Roy considered. The pain was definitely there, a throbbing presence, especially in his left arm, but it was dulled, manageable. "Maybe a 4 or 5. "That's good. We have you on pain medication through your IV. Let us know if it becomes more severe." Dr. Patel moved to his left side and gently examined the bandaged arm without disturbing the dressings. "You sustained multiple puncture wounds from the bear's teeth, primarily to your forearm where it appears the animal bit down. The bite damaged muscle tissue and partially severed your ulnar nerve, which is what required surgical intervention. We were able to repair the nerve, but you'll need physical therapy, and it may take several months for full function to return. If it does, there may be some permanent limitation." Roy stared at his bandaged arm. The doctor's words registered, but their full implication hadn't sunk in yet. "Will I be able to drive again? My truck, I mean. It's my livelihood." Dr. Patel's expression was sympathetic but direct. "Eventually, yes, I believe so, but not immediately. You're looking at least 6 to 8 weeks before you can consider returning to work, and even then, you'll need to be cleared by a physician." The news hit Roy like another attack. 6 to 8 weeks without work meant 6 to 8 weeks without income, As an owner-operator, he had some insurance, but it wouldn't cover everything. And there was the damage to his truck to consider as, well, your chest lacerations were significant but more superficial, Dr. Patel continued. Those should heal without complication, though you'll have scarring. You also have minor cuts and bruises on your legs and right arm, but nothing requiring more than cleaning and dressing. You lost a considerable amount of blood, which is why you're receiving a transfusion. She nodded toward a bag of blood hanging alongside his IV fluids. When can I leave? Roy asked, already thinking about how to manage the logistics of being stranded in Boise with an injured arm and an out-of-commission truck. Not for at least 2 to 3 days, Dr. Patel said firmly. We need to monitor for infection, which is a significant risk with animal bites, and make sure the surgical site is healing properly. You'll also need a course of rabies prophylaxis. Rabies shots? Roy winced. I thought those were pretty awful. The protocol has improved considerably over the years, Dr. Patel assured him. It's still not pleasant, but not the horror stories you might have heard about multiple injections to the stomach. Given that you were bitten by a wild animal and the bear can't be tested, it's a necessary precaution. Roy nodded resignedly. What about my truck and my cargo? I was in the middle of a haul. I believe the sheriff's department can answer those questions better than I can, Dr. Patel replied. A deputy has been waiting to speak with you when you're up to it. As if on cue, a knock came at the door, and a uniformed sheriff's deputy stepped in after Dr. Patel called for him to enter. He was a solid man in his 30s with a military short haircut and a respectful manner. Deputy Mark Callahan, Boise County Sheriff's Department, he introduced himself. Good to see you conscious, Mr. Dixon. Mind if I ask you a few questions about what happened today? Dr. Patel interjected. Keep it brief, please, Deputy. Mr. Dixon needs his rest. Yes, ma'am. I'll be quick. The deputy turned back to Roy. First, your truck is secure. We had it towed to a secure lot here in Boise. Your company has been notified, and they're handling the cargo situation. Relief washed over Roy. At least he didn't have to worry about his truck sitting abandoned at the rest stop. Thank you, he said sincerely. Deputy Callahan pulled out a notepad. Can you tell me exactly what happened with the bear? Start from the beginning. Roy recounted the events as clearly as he could remember them. His stop at the rest area, the nap in his sleeper cab, waking to find the bear in his truck, the attack, and the animal's eventual departure. And you're certain it was a black bear? The deputy asked, making notes. Positive, Roy confirmed. Not as big as a grizzly black fur. Probably a young adult male, if I had to guess. Had you seen this bear before? Roy hesitated, then admitted, I think it might have been the same bear I spotted at that rest area yesterday evening. I stopped there on my way into Boise and saw a black bear near the tree line. It was attracted to an apple core I'd tossed out. He felt a flush of embarrassment at this admission. Stupid mistake on my part. Deputy Callahan nodded without judgment. Bears have incredible memories for food sources. Once they associate humans with food, they can become problematic. Did you notice anything unusual about the bear's behavior yesterday? No, it seemed normal. Cautious but curious. It didn't approach me or act aggressive. And today, do you have any idea how it got into your truck? Roy shook his head, then winced as the movement caused pain to flare in his chest. I didn't lock the doors when I went to take a nap. I guess it must have figured out how to open the passenger door. Some bears can do that, right? I've heard stories. Yes, they're remarkably intelligent and dexterous. Black bears in particular have been known to open car doors, especially if they smell food inside. The deputy made another note. Was there food in your cab? Possibly. I might have had some beef jerky or an energy bar in the console or glove compartment. Nothing major, but enough for a bear to smell, I guess. Deputy Callahan asked a few more questions about the specifics of the attack, then closed his notepad. We've reported this to Idaho Fish and Game. They'll be monitoring the area for the bear. Given that it's entered a vehicle and attacked a person, they'll likely try to locate and remove it. Remove it? Roy asked. You mean kill it? That's typically the protocol when a bear shows this level of habituation to humans and has caused injury, the deputy explained. But that's Fish and Game's decision, not ours. Roy felt conflicted. On one hand, he was the one bleeding in a hospital bed because of the animal. On the other, he recognized that the bear was just being a bear, and he had contributed to the problem by carelessly disposing of food waste the day before. For now, focus on getting better, Deputy Callahan advised. We may need additional statements later, but this is enough to file my report. Is there anyone you'd like us to contact for you? Family. Roy thought of his daughter in Arizona, his ex-wife, his elderly mother in Nebraska. Not yet, he decided. Let me see how things go first. Don't want to worry them unnecessarily. The deputy nodded and handed Roy a business card. Call if you think of anything else or have questions. I've left my contact information with the nursing staff as well. After the deputy left, Roy was alone with his thoughts and the steady beeping of the monitors. The weight of his situation began to settle on him. The injuries, the lost work time, the medical bills that would surely follow. And beneath it, all a nagging sense of having narrowly escaped death in the most unexpected way. 22 years of driving, often in hazardous conditions, and what nearly took him out was a bear in a rest stop parking lot. The absurdity of it almost made him laugh, but the movement hurt his chest too much to continue. Instead, he closed, his eyes letting the pain medication carry him back into unconsciousness. The next time Roy woke, sunlight was streaming through the window blinds. A different nurse was checking his IV, and a breakfast tray sat on the rolling table beside his bed. "Morning, sunshine," the nurse said cheerfully. "Hungry?" Roy discovered that he was, in fact, ravenous. The nurse helped him sit up and position the tray, which contained a bland hospital breakfast of scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice. Roy ate awkwardly with his right hand, his dominant left arm still immobilized. "Your phone's in the drawer." "There," the nurse informed him, pointing to the bedside table. "It was in your pants pocket when you came in. It's been charging overnight." Roy thanked her and, after finishing his breakfast, retrieved the phone. He had multiple missed calls and messages, several from Debbie, his dispatcher, a couple from fellow drivers who must have heard about the incident, and one from his ex-wife, which meant the news had somehow reached Melissa. With a sigh, Roy called his daughter first. She answered on the second ring, her voice tight with worry. "Dad, oh my God, are you okay? Mom said you were attacked by a bear." "I'm okay, Lissa," Roy assured her, using his old nickname for her. "Beat up, but okay. How did you hear about it?" "It's all over the truck driver forums Mom follows to keep track of road conditions when you're visiting," Melissa explained. "Someone posted about a trucker being attacked by a bear at a rest stop in Idaho, and when she saw your name." "Why didn't you call us?" "I was a little busy getting surgery," Roy said, attempting humor. "And then unconscious. I was going to call today, I promise." "Surgery?" "Dad, what happened exactly?" Roy gave her the condensed version, downplaying the severity of his injuries. "The doctor says I'll be fine, just need some time to heal up. Mom wants to know if you need one of us to come up there." The offer surprised Roy. His relationship with his ex-wife, Karen, was civil but distant. No, that's not necessary. I'm in good hands here." "Are you sure I could catch a flight?" "Absolutely not," Roy said firmly. "You've got school, I'm fine, really. Going to be stuck here for a few days, then I'll figure out next steps. Promise you'll keep us updated and answer your phone." "I promise," Roy said softly, touched by her concern despite the often strained relationship they had. "Love you, kiddo." "Love you too, Dad. Be careful with wild animals from now on, okay?" After hanging up, Roy called Debbie next. She had already been in touch with the hospital and the sheriff's department and had arranged for another driver to pick up Roy's cargo and complete the delivery to Salt Lake City. "Don't you worry about anything work-related," Debbie told him firmly. "Workers' comp will cover your medical expenses and lost wages. The company's insurance will handle the truck repairs. What about the delivery penalties? I'm going to miss my window." "Act of God clause," Debbie said dismissively, "or act of bear in this case, it's covered. Your job now is to heal up. We need you back on the road, but only when you're ready." Roy felt a wave of gratitude for his dispatcher, who had always looked out for him. "Thanks, Debbie, I owe you one. You owe me nothing, just get better." The rest of the day passed in a blur of medical procedures and check-ins. Roy received his first rabies vaccination, a series of injections that were unpleasant, but not as horrific as the stories he'd heard. Physical therapists visited to discuss the rehabilitation program he would need to follow for his injured arm. A hospital social worker came by to help him navigate insurance paperwork and plan for his discharge in a few days. By evening, Roy was exhausted but more clear-headed about his situation. The pain was manageable with medication, and though the prognosis for his arm was uncertain, the doctors were cautiously optimistic about a good recovery with diligent physical therapy. As he was picking at his dinner, a turkey sandwich that bore little resemblance to actual turkey, a new visitor arrived at his door. A woman in her 30s wearing the uniform of Idaho Fish and Game stood there with a small notepad. "Mr. Dixon, I'm Wildlife Officer Jennifer Reeves with Idaho Fish and Game. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions about your encounter with the bear?" Roy gestured for her to enter. "Seemed to be a popular guy today." Officer Reeves smiled sympathetically as she pulled up a chair. "Bear attacks on humans are relatively rare in Idaho, so when they happen, we take them very seriously. I've read the sheriff's report, but I'd like to hear directly from you about the bear's behavior, if you're up to it." Roy once again recounted the events, including his first sighting of the bear the previous day and his ill-advised disposal of the apple core. Officer Reeves nodded as she took notes. "You're not the first person to make that mistake, and unfortunately, you probably won't be the last. Bears have an incredible sense of smell. They can detect food from over a mile away in the right conditions. Once they find an easy food source, they remember it. The deputy mentioned you might remove the bear," Roy said hesitantly. "That's our standard protocol when a bear has attacked a human," Officer Reeves confirmed, "particularly when the bear has shown habituation to human food sources and has lost its natural fear of people. It's not something we take lightly, but public safety has to be our priority." "It was just being a bear," Roy found himself saying. "I'm the one who messed up, throwing food waste and not locking my truck." Officer Reeves gave him an appraising look. "That's a generous perspective, given your circumstances, but the reality is, once a bear associates humans with food strongly enough to enter vehicles and has attacked a person, the risk of it happening again increases significantly. The next victim might not be as fortunate as you were." Roy hadn't thought of himself as fortunate, lying in a hospital bed with a mangled arm, but he understood her point. "Have you found it?" "Not yet. We've set up trail cameras and a trap in the area. The rest stop has been temporarily closed to the public while we conduct our search." She hesitated, then added, "I should tell you that this isn't the first report we've had of a food-conditioned bear in that area. There have been several incidents of bears investigating vehicles at that rest stop over the past month, though yours is the first to involve an injury." The information made Roy feel marginally better about his own role in the incident. Perhaps the bear had already been habituated to human food before his careless apple toss. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had contributed to a chain of events that might end with the bear being killed. Officer Reeves seemed to read his thoughts. "Nature operates on different rules than we do, Mr. Dixon. Bears aren't malicious, they're just incredibly efficient at finding food and remembering where they found it. Unfortunately, that efficiency sometimes brings them into conflict with humans, and we have to manage that conflict." "I understand," Roy said, though his feelings remained conflicted. "I appreciate your time," Officer Reeves said, standing to leave. "Your account will help us in our management efforts. Do you have any other questions for me?" Roy thought for a moment. "If you do catch the bear, is removing it the only option? Relocation is sometimes considered for bears that haven't shown aggression toward humans," she explained. "But in cases involving an attack, it's rarely deemed safe. Bears can travel hundreds of miles to return to known food sources, and we can't risk relocating a bear that has already demonstrated willingness to attack humans." Roy nodded his understanding, and Officer Reeves left him with her card in case he remembered any other details about the encounter. Alone again, Roy turned on the small TV in his room, seeking distraction from his thoughts about the bear and his own uncertain future. He flipped through channels until he came across a local news program. To his surprise, his own story was the lead item: "Idaho trucker survives bear attack at highway rest stop." The newscaster recounted the basic facts of the incident, some of which were accurate and others embellished for dramatic effect. There was even a brief clip of the rest area showing fish and game officers setting up equipment, presumably to trap the bear. The story ended with, "The victim, identified as Roy Dixon, is in stable condition at St. Luke's Hospital in Boise. Authorities advise travelers to be bear aware when using forest rest areas and to never leave food or food waste accessible to wildlife." Roy turned off the TV, uncomfortable with being the subject of a news story. His phone buzzed with a text message, an unfamiliar number, but the content identified the sender as Mike, the driver who had taken over his cargo delivery. The message indicated that the shipment had arrived safely in Salt Lake City and included a photo of Mike standing beside Roy's truck, which was now parked at the company's lot in Boise, waiting for him. The sight of his truck, his home on wheels for so many years, brought a lump to Roy's throat, The passenger door was visibly damaged, with deep scratches in the blue paint that could only have been made by the bear's claws. The interior would be in even worse shape, Roy knew, with blood and torn upholstery. It would need significant repairs before it was roadworthy again. Roy sent a brief thank you text to Mike, then set his phone aside. The day's activities had drained what little energy he had, and the pain medication was making him drowsy again. He closed his eyes, and this time his dreams were filled with dark shapes moving just out of sight, the scent of pine and blood, and the sensation of falling endlessly through cold mountain air. The next 2 days passed in a similar pattern of medical checkups, physical therapy assessments, and visitors. Roy's story had caught the attention of the local media, and a reporter tried to get in to interview him, but the hospital staff at Roy's request turned them away. He had no interest in becoming a momentary celebrity for having survived a bear attack. By the 3rd day, Dr. Patel declared herself satisfied with his progress. The surgical site was healing well with no signs of infection, and the rabies prophylaxis was proceeding as scheduled. Roy was cleared for discharge, though he would need to return for follow-up appointments and to continue the rabies vaccination series. "You're very lucky, Mr. Dixon," Dr. Patel told him during her final examination. "Bear attacks can be much worse than what you experienced. Your reflexes and quick thinking probably saved your life." Roy wasn't sure quick thinking accurately described his panicked struggle in the sleeper cab, but he accepted the compliment with a nod. "When can I get back to driving?" "As I mentioned before, you're looking at a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks for the initial healing. After that, it will depend on how well your physical therapy progresses and whether you regain sufficient function in your left arm for safe operation of a commercial vehicle." Dr. Patel's expression was sympathetic but realistic. "You'll need to be cleared by a physician specifically for your commercial driver's license requirements." The timeline still felt devastating to Roy, who had rarely taken more than a long weekend off in his driving career. The prospect of 2 months or more of inactivity stretched before him like a prison sentence. "I understand you're an owner-operator," Dr. Patel continued. "The social worker can help ensure you're connected with all available resources for someone in your situation. Workers' compensation should cover your medical expenses and a portion of your lost wages, but it's important to stay on top of the paperwork." Roy thanked her for the advice and for the care she had provided. After she left, a nurse helped him dress in fresh clothes that Debbie had arranged to have delivered to the hospital. A simple t-shirt, button-up flannel that could accommodate his bandaged arm, jeans, and his own boots, which had been cleaned of blood. The discharge process took another 2 hours, filled with paperwork, prescriptions, and instructions for wound care and follow-up appointments. Finally, Roy was seated in a wheelchair, hospital policy despite his protests that he could walk, and escorted to the main entrance, where Debbie herself was waiting with her personal car to drive him to a hotel. "You didn't have to come yourself," Roy said as she helped him into the passenger seat. "Could have sent a car service. And missed the chance to see for myself that you're okay? Not likely." Debbie was in her 50s, a no-nonsense woman who had been dispatching for the company since before Roy started driving for them. She treated all her drivers like family, whether they wanted the attention or not. "Besides, I brought you some real food. Figured you might be tired of hospital fare." She gestured to a paper bag on the back seat that emitted the tantalizing aroma of burgers and fries. Roy's stomach growled in response, and Debbie laughed as she got into the driver's seat. "Hotel first, then food," she decided, putting the car in gear. "You need to get settled." The hotel was a modest extended stay place not far from the hospital. The company had booked him a room for 2 weeks, with the option to extend if necessary. It had a small kitchenette, a queen bed, and a sitting area. More space than his sleeper cab, but somehow less comfortable for being unfamiliar. Debbie helped him get situated. Then they sat at the small table by the window and attacked the burger meal she'd brought. Roy hadn't realized how hungry he was until the first bite of real food hit his tongue. "So," Debbie said after they'd eaten in companionable silence for a few minutes, "what's the plan?" Roy sighed, setting down his half-eaten burger. "Don't have much of one yet. Follow doctor's orders, I guess. Start physical therapy. Try not to go stir-crazy in this room. Company will support you however we can," Debbie assured him. "Your truck's at our lot. Adjuster's already been out to look at it. Interior's a mess, as you can imagine, but nothing that can't be fixed." "Any word on the bear?" Roy asked. "Fish. Hand game caught one last night at the rest stop according to the news, Debbie told him. No confirmation yet if it's the same one that attacked you, but it seems likely. Roy felt a complicated mix of emotions at the news. Relief that the bear wouldn't harm anyone else, sadness that the animal had likely been euthanized, and a strange sense of connection to a creature that had nearly killed him. Don't you go feeling sorry for that bear, Debbie said, reading his expression with the insight of long acquaintance. It tried to make you into dinner. I know, Roy conceded. Just seems a waste is all. Bear was just doing what bears do. And now you're going to do what humans do. Heal up and get back on the road. Debbie's tone brooked no argument. Speaking of which, I brought you something else. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small laptop. Company laptop. Figured you might want something to keep you busy besides daytime TV. It's got internet access and some basic programs. Roy accepted the laptop with genuine gratitude. Thanks, Debbie, that'll help. And call your daughter, would you? She's been blowing up my phone asking for updates. Roy smiled sheepishly. Will do. Promise. After Debbie left, Roy sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted despite having done nothing more strenuous than ride in a car and eat a burger. His arm throbbed beneath the bandages, a constant reminder of the bear's powerful jaws. He took one of his prescribed pain medications, then carefully stretched out on the bed, mindful of his various injuries. The hotel room was quiet, too quiet compared to the constant background noise of a hospital or the familiar rumble of his truck's engine. Roy turned on the TV just to have some sound, finding a channel showing an old western he'd seen a dozen times. The familiar dialogue provided a comforting backdrop as he drifted off to sleep. He woke hours later to darkness outside his window and the TV still playing, though it was now showing a different program. His phone indicated it was just after p.m. Roy realized he'd slept through most of the afternoon and early evening. He sat up carefully, wincing at the stiffness in his muscles and the persistent pain in his arm. After using the bathroom and taking another pain pill, Roy felt alert enough to keep his promise to Debbie. He called Melissa, who answered immediately. "Finally!" she exclaimed. "I was beginning to think you'd been attacked by another bear." "Just sleeping off the excitement," Roy assured her. "I'm out of the hospital now, staying at a hotel in Boise for a while. Debbie said you might be stuck there for weeks, at least until I'm cleared to drive again, yeah. Not much choice in the matter. So, you'll be in one place for more than 48 hours. That's a first." Melissa's tone was light, but Roy could hear the underlying concern. "Maybe I could come visit for a weekend. Fall break is coming up." The offer caught Roy off guard. He and Melissa hadn't spent more than a day or two together in years, usually during his infrequent visits to Arizona, or her even more infrequent trips to wherever he happened to be between hauls. The thought of having her visit, having actual time together without the pressure of his departure looming, was both appealing and terrifying. "Are you sure? Boise's not exactly a happening vacation spot, and I'm not great company at the moment. Dad, you were attacked by a bear. That automatically makes you interesting company. Besides, I've never been to Idaho." "You're not missing much," Roy said, automatically, then caught himself. "But yeah, if you want to come, that would be really nice." They discussed potential dates and logistics, and by the end of the call, Melissa had tentatively planned to fly to Boise in 2 weeks, once Roy had settled into his recovery routine. After hanging up, Roy sat looking at his phone, a strange mixture of anticipation and anxiety swirling in his chest that had nothing to do with his injuries. The prospect of extended time with his daughter was a silver lining he hadn't anticipated. Their relationship had been strained since the divorce 10 years earlier, when Melissa was just 6. Roy's life on the road had made consistent parenting nearly impossible, and over time, the gaps between visits had grown longer, the phone calls shorter and more awkward. But perhaps this forced pause in his routine could provide an opportunity to bridge some of that distance. Over the next several days, Roy settled into a new routine. Mornings were for physical therapy appointments, where a relentlessly cheerful therapist named Brandon put him through increasingly challenging exercises designed to maintain and gradually rebuild the strength and mobility in his injured arm. The sessions were painful and frustrating, as Roy confronted the limitations of his damaged body. "Patience is key," Brandon told him repeatedly. "Nerve regeneration and healing take time. We're building the foundation for your recovery." Afternoons were typically spent resting, managing pain, and fighting boredom. Roy discovered that daytime television was even worse than he remembered. From rare sick days over the years, the laptop Debbie had provided became his lifeline, allowing him to keep up with news, browse truck forums, and even research physical therapy exercises he could do on his own. In the evenings, he would sometimes venture out of the hotel, taking short walks around the neighborhood to build his stamina and clear his head. The fresh air helped, though the unfamiliar urban surroundings made him long for the open road, the changing landscapes, the solitude of his cab. A week after his discharge from the hospital, Roy received confirmation from Fish and Game Officer Reeves that the bear they had captured was indeed identified as the one that had attacked him. Through DNA testing of blood and hair samples collected from his truck, they had made a positive match. What happened to it? Roy asked during their phone conversation, though he already knew the answer. The bear was euthanized as per protocol, Officer Reeves confirmed. Testing confirmed it was healthy, no rabies or other conditions that might have contributed to its behavior. Just a young male that had become habituated to human food sources. Thanks for letting me know, Roy said, unsure how else to respond. One other thing, Officer Reeves added. The rest area where the attack occurred has been reopened, but with new bear-resistant trash receptacles and additional signage about wildlife safety. Your incident prompted some overdue improvements. After the call ended, Roy sat on the edge of his bed, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The bear was gone, no longer a threat to other travelers. That should have brought relief, but instead Roy felt a hollow sadness. The animal had paid the ultimate price for human carelessness, not just his own, but the cumulative effect of many people's actions that had taught the bear to associate humans with easy food. That evening, Roy did something he rarely did. He called his ex-wife Karen. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice cautious. "Roy, is everything okay? Melissa's not here right now." "I know," Roy interrupted. "I talked to her earlier. I wanted to talk to you, actually, about her visit next week." "Oh," Karen sounded surprised. "What about it?" "Just wanted to make sure you're okay with it, and to thank you for suggesting it. Debbie told me you were the one who mentioned it first." There was a pause on the line. "Well, you were attacked by a bear, Roy. Seemed like a good reason for a family check-in." Karen's voice softened slightly. "She's excited about seeing you, you know. Talks about it every day." "Yeah?" "Yeah. She's got this whole list of questions about bears and truck driving in Idaho. I think she's planning to interview you for a school project or something." Roy laughed, a genuine laugh that felt good despite the twinge it caused in his healing chest. "I'll try to have good answers ready. Just be honest with her, Roy. That's all she's ever wanted from you." Karen's tone held no accusation, just a simple truth they both recognized. "I'll do my best," he promised. "And Karen, thanks for being understanding about all this. We may not be married anymore, but you're still Melissa's father. That matters." There was a pause, then she added, "Try not to get attacked by any more wildlife before she gets there, okay? One dramatic story is enough." "I'll do my best on that front too." After ending the call, Roy felt lighter somehow. The conversation with Karen had been more civil, more friendly even than any they'd had in years. Perhaps nearly dying had some social benefits, he thought wryly. The next day brought a new twist to Roy's recovery journey. His morning physical therapy session had gone reasonably well. He'd gained a few more degrees of motion in his injured arm, though the nerve pain remained intense whenever he pushed too far. Returning to his hotel room, he was surprised to find a business card slipped under his door. "Jack Harper, freelance journalist," the card read, with a local phone number and email address. On the back, a handwritten note. "Mr. Dixon, interested in hearing your bear attack story for a feature article. Generous compensation offered. Please call." Roy frowned at the card. The last thing he wanted was to become some kind of local celebrity for having the misfortune of being mauled by a bear. He tossed the card onto the desk and tried to put it out of his mind. But later that day, while browsing local news on his laptop, Roy came across an article that made his stomach clench. "Bear attack victim's account raises questions about wildlife. Management policies," the headline declared. The piece quoted sources close to the investigation, questioning whether the bear that attacked Roy had been properly identified before being euthanized, and suggesting that the incident revealed flaws in how human-wildlife conflicts were handled in Idaho's recreation areas. Roy read the article twice, growing more uneasy with each paragraph. While his name was mentioned only briefly as the victim Roy Dixon, a truck driver from Nebraska, The details of the attack were recounted vividly, some accurately, and others clearly embellished for dramatic effect. The article painted fish and game officers as trigger-happy and eager to kill the bear without sufficient evidence. That wasn't Roy's experience at all. Officer Reeves had been thorough and professional, and had clearly explained the protocols and reasoning behind the decision to euthanize the bear. Roy immediately reached for his phone and found her business card. "Officer Reeves," she answered on the third ring. "This is Roy Dixon, the truck driver from the bear attack last week," he began. "I just saw an article online that's saying some pretty misleading things about how your department handled the situation, and I wanted you to know I had nothing to do with it." "I've seen it," Officer Reeves replied, her voice tight. "Unfortunately, it's not the first time Jack Harper has written something like this. He has a particular agenda when it comes to wildlife management issues." "He left his card at my hotel room," Roy told her. "I ignored it, but now I'm thinking maybe I should have talked to him, set the record straight." "That's entirely your choice, Mr. Dixon. We can't stop you from sharing your experience with the media, but just know that Mr. Harper tends to interpret facts in ways that support his pre-existing views, regardless of what you might actually tell him." Roy considered this. "Is there anything I can do to help? Make a statement or something?" "If you're willing, a brief statement to our Public Affairs Office clarifying that you're satisfied with how the incident was handled would be helpful. But please don't feel obligated. You've been through enough without being dragged into a public controversy." After getting the contact information for Fish and Game's Public Affairs Office, Roy ended the call and sat thinking. He had no interest in becoming a central figure in a debate about wildlife management. At the same time, he felt a responsibility to ensure his experience wasn't misrepresented to serve someone else's agenda. In the end, Roy decided to provide a short statement to Fish and Game, confirming that he believed the department had handled the situation appropriately and professionally. He declined all requests for interviews, including a follow-up card from Jack Harper that appeared under his door the next day. Despite his efforts to stay out of the public eye, Roy's story continued to circulate locally. Several truckers who recognized his name from industry forums reached out with messages of support and their own stories of wildlife encounters on the road. One morning, Roy even received a fruit basket from the Idaho Trucking Association with a card wishing him a speedy recovery. The attention was uncomfortable for Roy, who had always preferred the solitude of long hauls to social interaction. But as the days passed and his body slowly healed, he found himself gradually adjusting to his temporary life in Boise. He discovered a small diner within walking distance of his hotel that served decent breakfast and didn't mind him lingering over coffee. The waitress there, a motherly woman named Doris, quickly learned his name and his story, treating him with a combination of sympathy and matter-of-fact pragmatism that Roy appreciated. "Bear should have known better than to tangle with a trucker," she told him one morning as she refilled his coffee cup. "You folks are made of tougher stuff." Roy smiled at that. "Not tough enough, apparently." "You're still here, aren't you? Bear isn't. I'd call that tough enough." The simple logic of her statement stayed with Roy throughout the day. He was still here. Despite the pain, the uncertainty about his future ability to drive, the financial concerns that loomed on the horizon as workers' comp covered only a portion of his usual income, he had survived. There was a certain victory in that basic fact. That evening, Roy received a call from the insurance adjuster, handling the damage to his truck. The news was mostly positive. The repairs were approved and underway, with an estimated completion date about 3 weeks out. The sleeper cab would need complete reupholstering, and the passenger door had to be replaced entirely, but the damage was deemed repairable rather than a total loss. "You got lucky," the adjuster told him. "Bears have totaled smaller vehicles. Completely. Must be one well-built truck." "They don't make them like they used to," Roy agreed, feeling a surge of affection for his battered Peterbilt. The truck had been his largest investment and his most consistent companion for the past decade. Knowing it would eventually return to the road gave him something concrete to look forward to, a goal beyond the day-to-day grind of physical therapy and pain management. As the day of Melissa's visit approached, Roy found himself growing increasingly anxious. His hotel room, while adequate for his own needs, suddenly seemed shabby and depressing when he imagined his daughter staying there. His arm, though Debbie, for recommendations of places Melissa might enjoy in Boise, researched transportation options, and even had the hotel staff add a rollaway bed to his room so Melissa wouldn't have to sleep on the small sofa. The morning of Melissa's arrival, Roy woke early, his stomach churning with a combination of excitement and apprehension. Her flight was scheduled to land at 11:30 a.m. Unable to drive himself, Roy had arranged for a rideshare to take him to the airport, his first time using such a service, which made him feel oddly helpless and dependent. The Boise airport was small by national standards but busy enough on a Friday morning. Roy stationed himself near the arrivals area, feeling conspicuous with his arm in a sling and the still visible scratches on his face and neck. He checked the arrivals board repeatedly, relieved to see that Melissa's flight from Phoenix was on time. When she finally emerged from the secure area, Roy almost didn't recognize her at first. It had been nearly a year since he'd seen her in person, and the changes that had occurred in that time were striking. Melissa had grown at least 2 inches. Her once round face had thinned into more mature features, and she carried herself with a confidence that was new. But when she spotted him and her face lit up with a smile, Roy saw his little girl again. "Dad!" she called, quickening her pace. She approached as if to hug him, then hesitated, eyeing his sling and visible injuries. "Can I—" "Carefully," Roy said with a smile, opening his good arm to her. Melissa hugged him gently from his right side, and Roy was surprised to find tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. He blinked them back, patting her shoulder awkwardly. "Let me look at you," he said, stepping back. "You've grown again." Melissa rolled her eyes. "Everyone always says that, because it keeps being true. Soon you'll be taller than your old man." "Not likely," she scoffed, though she seemed pleased by the observation. Her gaze traveled over his injuries more carefully now. "Those look like they hurt." "Not so much anymore," Roy lied. In truth, his arm was throbbing from the stress of travel and standing longer than he was used to. "Ready to go? I've got a car waiting outside." As they rode back to the hotel, Melissa peppered Roy with questions about the bear attack, questions he'd anticipated but still found difficult to answer. He tried to be honest without being graphic, aware that despite her increasing maturity, she was still young to hear the full, terrifying details. "Were you scared?" she asked, her voice smaller than it had been all day. Roy considered deflecting with humor or bravado, then remembered Karen's advice, to be honest. "Terrified," he admitted. "Never been so scared in my life." Melissa nodded, seeming to appreciate his candor. "I would have been too. Anyone would." At the hotel, Roy showed Melissa to their room. Suddenly, seeing it through her eyes, the generic decor, the cramped quarters, the institutional feel of a place meant for temporary stays, not for living. But Melissa seemed unfazed, claiming the rollaway bed as her territory, and immediately beginning to arrange her belongings with the systematic precision she'd inherited from her mother. "What's the plan for the weekend?" she asked as she organized. Roy had prepared for this question at least. "Thought we might do some sightseeing tomorrow. There's a downtown area with shops and restaurants, and a river walk that's supposed to be nice. Sunday, maybe the zoo or botanical garden if you're interested, and I've got physical therapy on Monday morning, but you're welcome to come along or stay at the hotel if you'd rather." Melissa considered this. "Can I see your truck while I'm here?" The question caught Roy off guard. Melissa had never shown much interest in his work before. "It's in the shop for repairs, but we can probably arrange to see it. Not much to look at right now, though. Pretty torn up from the bear." "I still want to see it," she insisted. "I've never actually been inside your truck, you know. Not since I was really little, anyway." Roy realized with a start that she was right. Whenever he visited Arizona, he either flew or rented a car, leaving his rig behind. And the few times Melissa had visited him on the road, they'd always met at hotels or restaurants, the truck serving merely as his transportation, not as the home on wheels it actually was to him. "We'll definitely go see it then," Roy promised. "I'll call Debbie and set it up." They spent the rest of the day getting reacquainted, with Melissa sharing stories from school and Roy carefully recounting some of his more interesting experiences on the road. They ordered pizza delivery for dinner and watched a movie on the hotel TV, falling into a more comfortable rapport than Roy could remember having with his daughter in years. As Melissa got ready for bed that night, Roy stepped outside the room to call Karen and let her know Melissa had arrived safely. The conversation was brief but friendly, without the underlying tension that had characterized their interactions for most of the past decade. She was really looking forward to this. "A visit," Karen said before hanging up. "I think she's needed some time with you, Roy. Just the two of you." The observation stayed with Roy as he returned to the room, where Melissa was already settling onto her rollaway bed, tapping away at her phone. The physical distance between them, him on the queen bed, her on the smaller bed across the room, seemed to mirror the emotional distance that had grown over years of separated lives. But the fact that she was here at all, that she had wanted to come, felt like a bridge being extended across that gap. "Night, Dad," Melissa said, setting her phone aside and turning off the lamp on her side of the room. "Night. Lissa," Roy replied, using the nickname again, testing its fit after years of disuse. In the darkness, Roy listened to his daughter's breathing gradually slow and deepen as she fell asleep. His arm ached, and he knew he should take a pain pill, but he didn't want to disrupt this moment of quiet connection, imperfect as it was. Eventually, the discomfort won out, and he carefully swallowed the medication with water from the bottle on his nightstand, then settled back to wait for sleep. Tomorrow, he thought, they would begin exploring Boise together. It wouldn't be the kind of father-daughter activity he might have imagined, hiking in the mountains or fishing in one of Idaho's renowned streams, but it would be something shared, a memory they could build together. For a man who had spent most of his adult life in perpetual motion, the prospect of simply spending time in one place with his daughter felt both foreign and precious. The weekend passed more quickly than Roy could have imagined. Despite his physical limitations, he and Melissa managed to see much of what Boise had to offer. They explored the downtown area, walked along the Boise River Greenbelt, completed a set of gentle resistance movements. Another week or two, and we might be able to remove the sling for longer periods. "How long until he can drive again?" Melissa asked, speaking up for the first time during the session. Brandon glanced at Roy, then back to Melissa. "That depends on a lot of factors: how the nerve heals, how much function returns, whether there are any complications. But for a commercial driver's license, the requirements are strict. Your dad needs to have good function in both arms to safely handle a big rig." "But he will be able to drive again, right?" Melissa pressed. "That's the goal we're working toward," Brandon assured her, though Roy noted he didn't make any guarantees. "Your dad's doing everything right so far." After the session, as they walked slowly back toward the hotel, Melissa was unusually quiet. Roy let the silence stretch for a while, knowing from experience that pushing her to talk rarely yielded results. Finally, she spoke. "What if you can't drive again? What would you do?" The question hit directly at the fear Roy had been trying to avoid confronting. "I'll drive again," he said, with more confidence than he felt. "Might take longer than I'd like, but I'll get there." "But what if you couldn't?" Melissa persisted. "Hypothetically." Roy sighed. "Honestly, I don't know. Driving's all I've done for most of my adult life. Didn't exactly develop a lot of other skills along the way." "You could learn something new," Melissa suggested. "Go back to school, maybe." The idea was so foreign to Roy that he almost laughed. "Bit old for that, don't you think?" "Mom went back to school when she was older than you are now," Melissa pointed out. "That's how she got her real estate license." Roy nodded, acknowledging the point. Karen had indeed reinvented herself after their divorce, transitioning from a stay-at-home mom to a successful realtor. He'd admired her determination, even as he'd continued in the only career he'd ever known. "Something to think about, I guess," Roy conceded. "But for now, let's focus on getting this arm working properly again, one step at a time." Melissa seemed satisfied with this answer, and the conversation shifted to plans for her final day in Boise before her flight home the next morning. Roy had saved the promised visit to his truck for last, having arranged with Debbie for them to see it at the repair shop that afternoon. The shop was a large facility, specializing in commercial vehicle repairs, located in an industrial area on the outskirts of Boise. Roy felt a strange mix of homecoming and alienation as they entered the cavernous space filled with the familiar sounds and smells of diesel engines and machinery. It had been nearly 2 weeks since he'd been in such an environment, the longest stretch away from the world of trucking he'd experienced in decades. Debbie met them at the front office, greeting Melissa warmly before leading them through the shop floor to where Roy's Peterbilt was being worked on. Roy felt a tightness in his chest as they approached the familiar blue truck, now partially disassembled as repairs progressed. The passenger door had been completely removed, its replacement not yet installed. The sleeper compartment had been stripped down to the frame, the torn mattress and shredded curtain long gone. The seats were out as well, waiting for new upholstery to replace the bare damaged originals. "Doesn't look like much at the moment," Roy said apologetically to Melissa, who was studying the truck with intense interest. "Usually keeps me a lot more comfortable than this." "Can I see inside?" she asked, gesturing to the cab. With permission from the head mechanic, Roy carefully led Melissa up the driver's side steps and into what remained of his cab. Even in its partially disassembled state, the space was recognizably his. The dashboard still held the small collection of photos, including one of Melissa from years earlier. His lucky baseball cap still hung from a hook on the wall. The specialized seat cushion he used for his back problems sat waiting to be reinstalled in the new seat. Melissa ran her fingers over the dashboard, pausing at the photo of herself, a gap-toothed second grader with pigtails, a lifetime ago. "You still have this old picture?" "Got a more recent one too," Roy said, pointing to another photo partially, hidden behind the first, Melissa at 14 from his last visit to Arizona. "But I keep them all." Melissa nodded, continuing her exploration of the cab. "This is where you live most of the time," she said, not quite a question. "Home sweet home," Roy confirmed. "Or it will be again, once they've put it back together. It's smaller than I remembered. I've never needed much space, just enough to sleep and store some basics. The road's the point, not the accommodations." Melissa moved toward the sleeper area, which was currently just an empty shell with wires and framework exposed. "This is where the bear attacked you?" Roy swallowed hard, the memory of those terrifying moments suddenly vivid. "Yeah, I was asleep when it got in. Woke up to find it in the front seat, then it came back here." Melissa stood in the narrow space, looking around as if trying to imagine the scene. "There's nowhere to run in here," she observed, quietly. "No," Roy agreed. "Nowhere at all." They remained silent for a long moment, Roy watching his daughter absorb the reality of his life on the road and the danger he had faced in this small space. Finally, Melissa turned back to him. "I think I understand better now," she said. "Why you're so determined to get back to driving. This is really your home, isn't it? More than anywhere else." The insight, coming from his 16-year-old daughter, struck Roy deeply. She had articulated something he had felt, but never quite put into words. The truck wasn't just his livelihood, it was the place where he felt most himself, most at home in the world. "Yeah," he said softly. "I guess it is." Debbie gave them a few more minutes with the truck, then guided them back to the office where she updated Roy on the repair timeline. If all went according to schedule, the truck would be ready in another week or so. Of course, that didn't mean Roy would be cleared to drive it yet. That was a separate hurdle entirely. As they left the shop, Roy noticed Melissa taking one last look at the Peterbilt, her expression thoughtful. He wondered what she was thinking, what conclusions she was drawing about his life and the choices he had made, whether she was judging him for choosing the road over a more stable, present role in her life. That evening, their last before Melissa's departure, they dined at a slightly nicer restaurant than their previous meals, a steakhouse near the hotel that Debbie had recommended. The conversation flowed more easily than it had at the beginning of the visit, the initial awkwardness having given way to a more comfortable rapport. "So," Roy said as they waited for dessert, "what did you think of Boise? Not exactly a teenager's dream vacation, I know." Melissa shrugged. "It was fine, different from Phoenix, greener." She hesitated, then added, "But it wasn't really about Boise, was it? It was about seeing you." Roy nodded, caught off guard by her directness. "Well, I'm glad you came. It's been really good having you here. Even though you got attacked by a bear to make it happen." Melissa grinned, the tension of the moment broken. Roy laughed. "There are less painful ways to arrange a visit, that's for sure. Next time maybe I'll just call." "You should." Melissa's smile faded to seriousness. "Even when you're back on the road. Call more, I mean, not just on birthdays and holidays." "I will," Roy promised, meaning it. "And maybe we can do this again. Not the bear attack part, but the visit part. When I'm back driving, I could try to arrange more routes through Arizona, spend some real time there." "I'd like that." Melissa paused, then asked, "Can I tell you something without you getting weird about it?" Roy raised an eyebrow. "I'll try my best. I've missed you, not just lately, but like for years. Even when I was mad at you for not being around, I still missed you." The simple honesty of her statement hit Roy like a physical blow. For years, he had told himself that his absence didn't matter that much to Melissa, that she was busy with her own life, that the equally accurate, though Roy had never heard it stated so directly. "Your mom's pretty insightful," he acknowledged, "but it's not that I love the road more than you, it's complicated." "Try to explain it," Melissa challenged him. I'm not a little kid anymore. I can understand complicated things. Roy considered how to put into words something he had never fully articulated even to himself. The road, it's freedom, in a way nothing else has ever been for me. Every day is different. Every mile is a choice I'm making, a small victory. When I'm driving, I know exactly who I am and what I'm supposed to do. He looked at his daughter, seeing her really listening, really trying to understand. But that doesn't mean I don't regret the things I missed. Your school plays, your soccer games, the everyday stuff that parents are supposed to be there for. But you wouldn't have done it differently, Melissa observed, not accusingly, but with a perception beyond her years. If you could go back, you'd still choose the road. Roy wanted to deny it, to tell her she was wrong. But the truth was written in the decades he'd spent behind the wheel, in the home he'd made in the sleeper cab of a Peterbilt. I don't know, he said finally. Maybe I would have tried harder to find a balance. Regional routes instead of long haul, something that would have let me be present more often. Melissa seemed to accept this, neither arguing nor agreeing. Well, maybe the bear did you a favor, in a weird way, forced you to stay still long enough to think about stuff like this. Roy laughed despite himself. I wouldn't go so far as to thank the bear, but yeah, maybe there's something to that. Their desserts arrived, chocolate cake for Melissa, apple pie for Roy, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics as they finished their meal. But Roy felt something had fundamentally changed between them. Some new understanding that hadn't existed before. It wasn't a perfect resolution to years of absence and missed connections, but it was a beginning. The next morning came too quickly. They shared breakfast at the diner where Roy had become a regular. Doris fussing over Melissa and bringing extra sides on the house when she learned it was the girl's last day in town. Then it was time to head to the airport. The rideshare summoned, the goodbyes looming. At the departure drop-off, Roy helped Melissa with her small suitcase, then stood awkwardly unsure how to say goodbye. Melissa solved the problem by stepping forward and hugging him carefully, mindful of his healing injuries. Thanks for coming, Roy said, patting her back with his good arm. It meant a lot. Call me when you get back on the road, Melissa instructed. And before that too, I want to know how physical therapy goes. I will, Roy promised. And next time I'm near Phoenix, we'll do something fun. Your choice. Melissa nodded, shouldering her backpack. I'd better go. Don't want to miss my flight. Right, have a safe trip. Tell your mom I said hello. With a final wave, Melissa disappeared through the sliding doors into the terminal, leaving Roy standing alone at the curb. He waited until she was completely out of sight before returning to the waiting car, a weight in his chest that had nothing to do with his healing injuries. The hotel room felt emptier than ever when Roy returned. Melissa's presence had briefly transformed the impersonal space into something warmer, more like a home. Now it was just a room again, a temporary stopping place on his journey back to the road. But something had changed, Roy realized, as he sat on the edge of the bed where his daughter had spent the weekend. The road was still calling to him, still represented the freedom and purpose he craved, but it no longer seemed like the only thing that mattered. There was another call now, fainter but persistent, the call of connection, of being present in his daughter's life in a way he hadn't been before. How to balance these competing pulls was a question Roy didn't yet have an answer for. But as he reached for his phone to let Karen know Melissa was on her way home, he felt a determination to find one, to make the most of this unexpected pause in his journey and perhaps chart a slightly different course moving forward. The following weeks fell into a rhythm as Roy continued his recovery. Physical therapy sessions became more demanding as his arm gradually healed, the pain evolving from the sharp, immediate agony of fresh wounds to the deeper ache of damaged tissues rebuilding themselves. Brandon, his therapist, was encouraged by the progress, noting increased range of motion and gradually returning strength. The nerve damage is the wild card, Brandon explained during one session, as Roy struggled with exercises targeting fine motor control in his fingers. Nerves regenerate slowly and sometimes incompletely, but you're showing promising signs. Roy's truck repairs progressed as well. The insurance company had approved all the necessary work, and the shop was moving efficiently. By the end of the third week after Melissa's visit, the vehicle was nearly ready. New upholstery in the sleeper cab, new door installed, all systems checked and rechecked. Roy visited the shop regularly to monitor the progress, each visit strengthening his determination to get back behind the wheel. He would stand beside the massive blue Peterbilt, running his hand along its freshly painted surface, checking that repairs with the critical eye of someone whose life depended on the vehicle's reliability. "She's almost ready for you," the head mechanic told him during one such visit. "Just waiting on you to be ready for her." That was the challenge now, convincing his doctors that he was fit to drive commercially again. Roy pushed himself in. Physical therapy, sometimes too hard, earning stern warnings from Brandon about the dangers of rushing the healing process. "Patience," Brandon reminded him repeatedly. "Your body will tell you when. It's ready. Forcing it will only set you back." But patience had never been Roy's strong suit, especially not when his livelihood and identity were at stake. He researched alternative therapies, added extra exercises to his routine, and meticulously followed every recommendation for promoting nerve regeneration. 4 weeks after Melissa's visit, Roy had his most promising doctor's appointment yet. Dr. Patel examined his healing arm, reviewed his physical therapy progress, and nodded with cautious approval. "The external wounds have healed nicely," she observed, "and your strength is returning faster than I initially expected. The nerve function is still compromised, but showing improvement." "When can I drive again?" Roy asked, the same question he posed at every appointment. This time, Dr. Patel didn't immediately deflect. "I think we can discuss a provisional return to driving soon, not commercially yet, but personal driving to rebuild your confidence and assess your actual capabilities on the road." It wasn't the complete clearance Roy had hoped for, but it was progress. The prospect of getting behind the wheel of any vehicle, even just a car, felt like a significant step forward. "I'll need you to be evaluated by an occupational therapist who specializes in driving assessments," Dr. Patel continued. "They'll provide a more detailed analysis of your readiness to drive and any accommodations you might need." The appointment was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, Roy received more good news. His truck repairs were complete, and the vehicle was ready to be released back to him. Though he couldn't drive it yet, the company agreed to keep it at their secure lot until he was cleared to return to work. The day the truck was released, Roy had Debbie drive him to see the finished product. The Peterbilt looked almost new again. The blue paint gleaming, the chrome polished, no visible signs of the violence that had occurred inside. Roy circled it slowly, examining every detail, then climbed carefully into the cab. The interior had been completely redone. New seats, new upholstery in the sleeper compartment, new curtains separating the sleeping area from the driving space. The mattress had been replaced with one even better than the original, and the dashboard had been restored to pristine condition. Roy's personal items, the photos, the lucky baseball cap, the small collection of road trip souvenirs, had been carefully preserved and returned to their places. "What do you think?" Debbie asked, watching from outside the open driver's door. "Looks better than when I bought it," Roy admitted, running his hand over the new leather of the driver's seat. "Farsi, can't believe how good a job they did. Insurance company probably figured it was cheaper than dealing with you if they cut corners," Debbie joked. Roy continued his inspection, checking storage compartments, testing switches and controls, familiarizing himself again with the space that had been his primary home for so many years. When he finally settled into the driver's seat, his hands finding their natural positions on the steering wheel, it felt right in a way nothing had since the attack. "I need to get back on the road, Debbie," he said quietly, not looking at her. "Don't feel like myself without it." Debbie climbed up to stand on the running board, putting her at eye level with him through the open door. "You will," she said with certainty. "When you're ready. The company's holding your routes for you. Customers keep asking when you'll be back." The vote of confidence meant more to Roy than he could express. He simply nodded, not trusting his voice. As promised, Roy had been calling Melissa regularly since her visit, updating her on his recovery and, somewhat to his surprise, finding himself genuinely interested in the details of her daily life she shared in return. Their conversations had gradually evolved from awkward check-ins to more natural exchanges, building a connection that had been missing for years. "Dad, that's great news about the truck," Melissa said when he called to tell her about seeing the repaired vehicle, "and the doctor saying you might be able to drive soon." "Just regular driving for now," Roy cautioned, "still a ways off from commercial clearance." "Still progress, though," Melissa insisted. "One step at a time, remember?" Roy smiled at hearing his own words reflected back to him. "Yeah, one step at a time. How's school going?" As Melissa launched into a story about her history class project, Roy settled more comfortably on his hotel room bed, listening with an attention he had rarely given to such conversations in the past. The details of her life, her friends, her classes, her small triumphs and frustrations no longer seemed distant or irrelevant. They were pieces of his daughter's world, a world he was finally making a genuine effort to understand and be part of, even from a distance. The driving assessment, when it finally arrived, was both encouraging and sobering. The occupational therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Catherine, put Roy through a series of evaluations, testing his reaction time, strength, range of motion, and decision-making. Abilities under pressure. "You're doing remarkably well considering the extent of your injuries," she told him after completing the clinical portion of the assessment. "Next, we'll do an actual driving test to see how you handle a vehicle in real-world conditions." The test vehicle was a mid-sized sedan equipped with special monitoring devices to record Roy's performance. It felt tiny compared to his rig, but Roy was grateful for the opportunity to be behind a wheel again, any wheel. Catherine directed him through a carefully planned route that included city streets, highway driving, and various maneuvers designed to test his capabilities. Throughout the drive, Roy was acutely aware of the limitations in his left arm, the reduced strength when turning the wheel, the occasional tingling in his fingers, the fatigue that set in more quickly than it would have before the attack. But he compensated instinctively, adjusting his technique to work within his new constraints. "You're a professional driver, and it shows," Catherine commented as they returned to their starting point. "You've already developed adaptations for your injury without formal training. That's impressive." "So I passed?" Roy asked hopefully. "For personal driving, yes. I'll recommend that you be cleared to drive personal vehicles, with the caveat that you should avoid extended periods behind the wheel until your endurance improves." Catherine made notes on her tablet. "As for commercial driving, particularly for long-haul trucking, that's a separate evaluation with more stringent requirements. You're not there yet, but you're moving in the right direction." It wasn't everything Roy wanted to hear, but it was progress. With Catherine's recommendation, Dr. Patel cleared him for personal driving the next day. The ability to drive himself, again even just in a rental car, represented a significant recovery milestone and a taste of the independence Roy had been missing. His first solo drive was to the diner where he'd become a regular. Doris greeted his announcement with a cheer that drew attention from other customers, many of whom had heard pieces of Roy's story over the weeks and offered their congratulations. "Next thing you know, you'll be back in that big rig of yours, crossing the country again," Doris predicted as she refilled his coffee cup. "That's the plan," Roy agreed. "One step closer today." The rental car gave Roy a new freedom to explore Boise and its surroundings, no longer limited to what was within. Walking distance of his hotel or accessible by rideshare. He drove to nearby parks, took scenic routes through the foothills, and even ventured to the Sawtooth Mountains, though he deliberately avoided the rest area where the attack had occurred. He also began driving to the company lot regularly to check on his truck, sometimes sitting in the cab for hours, reading or just thinking, reconnecting with the space that had been his home for so long. Occasionally, he would start the engine just to hear its powerful rumble and feel the subtle vibrations through the seat, sensations that had been the backdrop to most of his adult life. During one such visit, nearly 8 weeks after the attack, Debbie found him in the cab reviewing maintenance logs. "Thought I might find you here," she said, climbing up to the passenger seat. "Got some news you might be interested in." Roy set aside the logbook. "Good news or bad news? Bit of both, maybe." Fish and Game just released their final report on the bear incident. Apparently, they've documented multiple cases of food-conditioned bears in that area over the past couple of years. After your attack, they conducted a more thorough investigation and found that one of the dumpsters at the rest area had a broken lock, allowing bears easy access to trash. "So it wasn't just my apple core," Roy concluded. "Sounds like it was a systemic problem. Your incident finally pushed them to make changes. They've installed bear-proof containers throughout the area and increased ranger patrols." Debbie paused. "Doesn't change what happened to you, but thought you might want to know." The information provided a context for the attack that Roy had been missing, a broader picture that distributed responsibility beyond his own careless disposal of food waste. It didn't erase his role in the encounter, but it helped him understand it as part of a larger pattern of human-wildlife conflict in the area. "Thanks for telling me," Roy said, genuinely grateful for the update. "Helps make sense of things somehow." Debbie nodded, then switched to a more practical topic. So the company's starting to ask about your timeline, not pressuring, just planning. Any updates on when you might be cleared for commercial driving? Roy sighed. Still working on it. My personal driving is going well and physical therapy is showing good results. But commercial clearance is a higher bar, need more strength and endurance. In the arm before they'll sign off. No rush, Debbie assured him. Just keeping them informed. Your routes will be there when you're ready. That evening, Roy called Melissa with an idea that had been forming in his mind for several days. How would you feel about coming to Boise again? He asked, after they'd exchanged their usual updates. Maybe for a longer visit this time. Over. Your summer break. Seriously. Melissa sounded surprised but interested. What would we do for that long in Boise? Well, that's the thing. We might not stay in Boise the whole time. I'm driving now, regular cars at least. Thought maybe we could take a road trip. See some of Idaho, maybe into Montana or Wyoming. Visit Yellowstone if you're interested. The suggestion was met with a moment of silence, then an enthusiastic response. That would be awesome. I've always wanted to see Yellowstone. And the Grand Tetons too, they're right next door. We'd have to clear it with your mom, Roy cautioned, not wanting to get Melissa's hopes up before the logistics were worked out. And it depends on how my recovery continues, but I thought it might be good for both of us. I'll talk to Mom. Tonight, Melissa promised, but I think she'll say yes. She's been weirdly supportive of us spending more time together lately. After ending the call, Roy sat on his hotel bed, contemplating the plan he'd just proposed. A road trip with his daughter was something he'd never seriously considered before. His driving had always been work, not a shared experience or a means of connection. But now, prevented from his usual long-haul routes, he found himself considering the road differently, as a way to bridge the gap between his world and Melissa's, to share something of his life with her in a new context. It would be a different kind of driving than he was used to, shorter distances, frequent stops, passenger, comfort as the priority rather than delivery schedules. But the prospect energized him in a way few things had since the attack. It gave his continued recovery a new purpose, beyond simply returning to his job. The following weeks brought steady improvement in Roy's condition. The nerve damage in his arm would likely never fully heal. Dr. Patel had been clear about that. Possibility from the beginning. But his strength, dexterity, and endurance continued to increase with dedicated physical therapy. By the 12-week mark post-attack, Roy was ready for his commercial driving evaluation. This assessment was far more rigorous than the personal driving test had been. It began with a thorough medical examination, followed by specific tests of Roy's ability to handle the controls of a commercial vehicle. The evaluator, a former trucker himself, was meticulous in his observations, watching for any sign that Roy's injured arm might compromise safety. "All right, Dixon," the evaluator said as they approached a Peterbilt similar to Roy's own. "Show me how you'd perform a standard pre-trip inspection." Roy circled the truck, pointing out each component he would check, demonstrating the physical movements required, testing lights, checking tire pressure, examining the coupling system. The evaluator made notes without comment, his expression neutral. Next came the driving portion. Roy climbed into the cab, adjusted the seat and mirrors, and started the engine. The familiar rumble beneath him was like greeting an old friend. He pulled out of the lot and onto the designated test route, which included urban streets, interstate driving, and, most challengingly, a series of backing maneuvers in a controlled yard. Throughout the test, Roy was conscious of his arm, the lingering weakness, the occasional tremor when he held a position too long, the dull ache that intensified with use. But he had spent weeks developing compensatory techniques, subtly adjusting his grip and posture to accommodate his new limitations. Whether these adjustments were sufficient to meet the stringent CDL requirements remained to be seen. After 3 hours of comprehensive testing, they returned to the starting point. The evaluator reviewed his notes silently, while Roy waited, trying not to fidget. "Your experience shows," the evaluator said finally. "You've obviously been doing this a long time, and you've made smart adaptations for your injury." He paused, and Roy braced himself for the but he knew was coming. "However, I'm noticing fatigue in your left arm during extended operations, particularly during the backing sequence. In a real-world situation, you'd be doing this after hours of driving, potentially in adverse conditions." Roy nodded, unable to deny the observation. His arm had indeed been trembling with fatigue by The end of the backing tests. Here's where we stand, the evaluator continued. I'm not going to clear you for full long-haul duties yet. Your strength and endurance need more improvement. But I am willing to recommend a limited return to commercial. Driving, shorter routes, regular rest periods, gradually increasing distances as your stamina builds. It wasn't the full clearance Roy had hoped for, but it was far better than continued sidelining. A path back to his profession, even a gradual one, was opening before him. I'll take it, Roy said, extending his hand. Thank you. The evaluator shook it firmly. You've put in the work and it shows. Just don't push too far too fast. That arm needs time no matter how stubborn you are. With the limited commercial clearance in hand, Roy's life began another transition. The trucking company, true to Debbie's word, worked with him to identify suitable routes that would accommodate his current capabilities. Day runs within Idaho and neighboring states, with regular returns to Boise. It wasn't the cross-country long haul he was accustomed to, but it was driving. It was purpose. Roy moved out of the extended stay hotel that had been his home for nearly 3 months and into a small apartment in Boise. The decision to establish a more permanent base was both practical and symbolic, a recognition that his recovery would continue for some time, and perhaps an acknowledgement of the value of having a fixed point in his increasingly mobile life. The apartment was Spartan by most standards, a one-bedroom with basic furnishings that Roy supplemented with only the essentials, but compared to his sleeper cab, it felt positively spacious. He arranged the few personal items he possessed, including the photos of Melissa that had survived the bear attack, and gradually began to think of the place as home, or at least a version of it. His first day back behind the wheel professionally was both triumphant and humbling. The route was straightforward, a delivery from Boise to Pocatello and back, a distance Roy would have considered a mere warm-up in his previous life. Now it represented a significant milestone, a return to the identity that had defined him for decades. The familiar rhythm of professional driving came back to him instantly, the methodical pre-trip inspection, the paperwork, the careful navigation through traffic and onto the open highway. The Peterbilt, fully repaired and meticulously maintained, responded to his touch as it always had. If the truck remembered the violence that had occurred within its cab, it gave no sign. Roy was more conscious than ever of the landscape around him as he drove, the rolling hills giving way to mountains, the changing light across the terrain, the occasional wildlife visible from the highway. He found himself particularly alert for bears, though he knew the chances of spotting one from the interstate were minimal. The memory of his encounter remained vivid, not just in his dreams, but in the persistent ache in his arm when he pushed it too hard, in the scars that marked his chest and shoulder, in the occasionally limited mobility of his fingers. That evening, after successfully completing his first route and returning to Boise, Roy called Melissa with the news. "That's awesome, Dad," she exclaimed. "How did it feel to be back?" "Like coming home," Roy admitted. "Different route than I'm used to, but still good to be behind the wheel again." "Does this mean our road trip is definitely happening?" "As long as your mom approves, absolutely. I'm building up my driving stamina, and my schedule has some flexibility now. Thinking maybe late June after school lets out?" "Perfect," Melissa confirmed. "Mum's already basically said yes. She just wants the details when we have them." The prospect of the trip had become a shared point of anticipation for both of them. Melissa had been researching potential destinations and activities, sending Roy links to attractions in Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks. Roy, for his part, had been mapping routes and calculating driving times, applying his professional expertise to this personal journey. Over the next several weeks, Roy settled into his new routine, regular regional routes that gradually increased in distance as his endurance improved, ongoing physical therapy to continue strengthening his arm, and the slow process of creating a life that wasn't solely defined by the road. He joined a support group for injury survivors at the suggestion of his doctor, finding unexpected comfort in sharing experiences with others who understood the challenges of adapting to new physical limitations. Throughout it all, he maintained regular contact with Melissa, their planned road trip serving as a focal point for their increasingly easy conversations. They developed a shared vocabulary of inside jokes and references, building the kind of casual intimacy that had been lacking in their relationship for years. As June approached, Roy underwent another evaluation of his commercial driving capabilities. This time, the results were more positive. His strength and endurance had improved significantly, allowing for an expansion of his approved routes. He still wasn't cleared for the longest cross-country hauls, but the restrictions on his driving were gradually easing. At this rate, you could be back to full duty by fall, the evaluator told him, assuming you continue with your therapy and don't push beyond your limitations. The projection aligned well with Roy's own plans. The summer would be devoted to regional work and the road trip with Melissa. By autumn, he might be ready to consider returning to the longer routes that had been his specialty, if that was still what he wanted. And therein lay a question Roy had been increasingly pondering. Did he want to return fully to his former life? The bear attack and its aftermath had forced upon him a different existence, one with more stability, more connection, particularly with Melissa. The apartment in Boise, initially just a necessity during his recovery, had begun to feel like a genuine base, a place to return to rather than merely pass through. These thoughts were on Roy's mind as he drove a load from Boise to Missoula in mid-June, just a week before Melissa was due to arrive for their road trip. The route took him through some of the most beautiful country in the Northwest, forests and mountains, rivers winding alongside the highway. It was the kind of scenery he had observed thousands of times in his driving career, but had rarely truly appreciated, always focused on the destination rather than the journey. Now, with the perspective granted by his near-death experience and the slower pace of his recovery, Roy found himself noticing details he would have previously overlooked: the particular quality of late afternoon light on the mountains, the varying shades of green in the forests, the patterns of clouds building and dispersing across the vast sky. The road itself seemed different somehow, less a means to an end and more a place of its own, worthy of attention and respect. As he approached a familiar stretch of highway where the road curved alongside a river, Roy noticed a pullout ahead, a scenic viewpoint he had passed countless times without stopping. On impulse, he signaled and guided the big rig into the pullout, setting the brakes and cutting the engine. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the occasional passing vehicle and the distant sound of the river below. Roy sat for a moment in the cab, then opened the door and stepped down, stretching his legs and his healing arm. The view was spectacular. The river winding through a valley, mountains rising on either side, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the landscape. Roy walked to the edge of the pullout, where a metal railing separated the viewpoint from a steep drop to the river below. He leaned carefully on the railing with his good arm, taking in the scene. A small movement in the trees below caught his attention. Roy focused on the spot, his eyes narrowing as he made out the shape moving through the undergrowth. A black bear, not large, probably a yearling recently separated from its mother. The animal was foraging peacefully, unaware of being observed, its powerful body moving with surprising grace through the forest. Roy watched the bear without fear, protected by distance and the knowledge that this was how encounters with wildlife should be: the human observing from afar, the animal undisturbed in its natural environment. The bear continued its foraging, occasionally raising its head to test the air, then returning to its search for food. After several minutes, the bear wandered deeper into the forest and disappeared from view. Roy remained at the railing, reflecting on the unexpected encounter. There was a symmetry to it that felt significant. Another black bear, but this time in its proper context, at a safe distance, a reminder of the natural world that existed alongside the human one, but was fundamentally separate from it. The bear that had attacked him had crossed a boundary, had entered the human domain, partly due to Roy's own carelessness, partly due to systemic issues at the rest area, and partly due to the animal's own habituation to human food. That crossing had resulted in violence and ultimately death for the bear. This bear, by contrast, remained where it belonged, and the encounter was one of mutual respect and distance. Roy finally returned to his truck, checking his watch and calculating the remaining drive time to Missoula. He would arrive later than planned after his unscheduled stop, but the delay seemed insignificant compared to what he had gained: a moment of perspective, a peaceful encounter that in some way balanced the violent one that had changed his life. As he started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, Roy felt a sense of completion, as if a circle had been closed. The memory of the attack would always be with him, inscribed in his scars and in the occasional limitations of his healing body. But it no longer seemed like the defining event of his life, merely one. chapter in a continuing story. The road stretched before him, leading toward Missoula and then back to Boise, where Melissa would soon arrive for their journey together. Beyond that lay autumn and the possibility of returning to long-haul routes, or perhaps a different path altogether. The future, like the highway, offered multiple routes, and for the first time in decades, Roy was truly considering his options rather than automatically following the most familiar path. The bear was gone, disappeared into the forest where it belonged. The human continued on his way, carrying the memory of their brief, distant encounter alongside the more painful memory of teeth and claws and fear in the confined space of a sleeper cab. Both experiences were true. Both were part of the complex relationship between humans and the wilderness that surrounded their roads and rest areas and carefully defined spaces. Roy adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, feeling the slight pull in his healing arm, a permanent reminder of what had happened at the Sawtooth Rest area months earlier. The pain was manageable now, just as the memory was manageable. Both would likely remain with him in some form for the rest of his life, but neither would define him unless he allowed it. Ahead, the highway curved around a mountain, revealing a new vista of valleys and forests and distant peaks. Roy drove toward it steadily, his truck a small moving point in the vast landscape, temporary but purposeful, passing through but fully present in the moment of passage. Like the bear in the forest below the viewpoint, he had found his proper place in the world again, changed by his experiences, but not diminished by them. The setting sun cast his shadow long on the road before him as he drove on toward Missoula, toward Melissa's visit, toward whatever came next in the continuing journey of his life.